Good evening. Wan Sheng Hao. Buenos noches. Shub Sham or Namaste. Masa al Khair. I don't know how to say that. Bon dia. Guten Abend. Bueno Sera. Dobry Vishor. And Dobry Veshor. So good evening, greetings and salutations to the 310 tribe. I think I got most of the languages. I think I butchered most of them. Hopefully everybody's doing well tonight. We got it in the audience. If you guys can hear and see me, give me a giant thumbs up. Yeah, wow. Carrie Nelson, thank you. Roberto Campagna, thank you. For super chats, much appreciated. And Lisa was the first one on. Hey, Lisa, got Dora, Catalin, Gary Turner, Sherry P, Amy Potter, P. Wayne, Amy Potter. Did I say that already? Connie Wood. Let's see. We keep going down. Anna K, Pamela Minnick, Kathy Hill, Emma Berean, Straight Up, Ultra Watchman, Kathy Hill. I think I said that already. Running into the same names. Gary Turner, did I say that? I'm mixing everybody's names up now. I'm in trouble. Sir Pierce Seville. Who else are the mods tonight? Stacy OK. Hey, Stacy. I don't know if my mom will be on tonight. Is she on here? Ruthie Girl, Melody Phillips, Jan McGrath, SC Bach, Aaron Reberg, Jean Moschetti, Just a Bird, Barbara Sandoval, Green Jeans. Well, hello to everybody. Thank you guys for hanging out tonight. It's been a kind of a good, I had a great weekend. Hung out with my son, went to my daughter's volleyball game, got to hold a grandbaby for a really long time. So I was pretty excited about that. Arnie Bragg. Hey, Arnie. Got folks on Facebook as well. Hello to you guys. Mods, if you can remember, if there's any questions on Facebook, to grab those as well. Brooke. Hey, Brooke. Beauty for Ashes. T-Bone. Yvonne Kennedy. Kathy B. Well, hello to everybody. It's so good to be here with you tonight. Before I get started on tonight's program, the next conference I'll be speaking at will be in Boise, Idaho. Should be on the 30th of May. So getting up there on the 29th, hanging out, speaking on the 30th, and then I might be doing something on Sunday as well. I'm not entirely sure, other than flying up to northern Idaho to go see my mom for a week. So that'll be great. It's good to have everybody here. July, I'll be speaking in Guthrie, Oklahoma, I believe on the 19th, if I'm not mistaken. Then Roseburg, Oregon on August 10th. Fort Collins, Colorado, that'll be September 11th and 12th. And then Belfast, Northern Ireland, September 25th through 27th. So I tell you what, I'm excited to go to Ireland again with Keir Starmer not there. I think he stepped down and resigned yesterday or today. I can't remember which. I think he threatened to step down yesterday, and then I think he actually stepped down today. So that's good news. It has been very busy. I'm feeling that itch to write because I haven't written anything other than the book. I mean, like articles and stuff. I need to get back into it. I just have to finish 2 more presentations, and then I will be kind of done for the summer, and I can just focus back on writing. And then the book should be out at some point this summer, or I think it'll be like early fall. It'll come out. So when it comes out, we'll bring it out to everybody. Icarillion. Hey, Icarillion. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I feel like I'm butchering it every time I say it. Leroy Loves the Lord. Lori Knight. Bia Berean. Shelly 3379. Shelly says, I'm in northern Idaho. Good. I'll be up in the Sandpoint area. Michelle Clark, hi Pete, ready to fly, Maranatha family. Yep. It is, it's not a problem that I have that the rapture can't solve. Yvonne says she miss Titus. Yep. Yeah, he is growing up. He's almost 5 feet tall now. It's crazy. A few more inches, man. He'll be up there. So, good to see everybody. Lots happening in the world, obviously. And I wanted to step back a little bit and focus on the collapse of the American dream. And it's not what you think it is. It's, when we think about the collapse, we've got, so much history at our fingertips now that we can go back and look at all the empires that have come and gone through the history, through the centuries, through the ages, and we can armchair quarterback and critique, what went right, what went wrong with these empires. And it just seems like it seems like at times that we're heading on that same trajectory. And in a way that's true, but it's not going to end up where people think it's going to end up. So let me, I'm going to start off here with a couple of quotes. The first one is from James Truslow Adams, no relation to President Adams, but he was born in the late 70s, 1870s, and died in the late 1940s. He wrote this. He says, "The American dream is the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is a difficult dream for the European upper classes to interpret adequately, and too many of us ourselves have grown weary and mistrustful of it. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position." That's in his book called The Epic of America. Actually, let me add this to the screen here. 1993, Bill Clinton said something very similar. He said, "The American dream that we were all raised on is a simple but powerful one. If you work hard and play by the rules, you should be given a chance to go as far as your God-given ability will take you." And coming from him, that's pretty rich, right? I mean, the people that have broken the most amount of rules in the history of American politics, Bill and Hillary Clinton, still in the early 1990s, he was presenting himself as a very moderate Democrat. And, he was talking about the American dream. And what he said there was pretty commonplace. That's what I've kind of heard my whole life. You work hard, play by the rules, and you will get ahead in life. And that seemed to be working for about 30 to 40 years, really, from World War II, the end of World War II, all the way up through the 1980s. The goal was, if you were a guy at least, you work out, get in shape, get a good muscle car, get the girl of your dreams, marry said girl, have a family, have a job, have the white picket fence. And I think for most Americans, that was really the goal, right? You wanted to work a job you liked working at, have a house you liked living in, be married to somebody you liked being married to, having 2.5 kids, those kids growing up to be successful and better off than you were. And, from the 1950s through the 1980s, that was certainly a possibility. And for a lot of people, it was a reality. But something changed. And it was in the 1990s, in fact, that things began to skyrocket and then kind of come back to reality in the early 2000s. So we know in the 1990s, we had the Gulf War, with the victory of the Gulf War, which Saddam Hussein was defeated and kicked out of Kuwait. We had the collapse of the Iron Curtain. Then we had the collapse of the Soviet Union. So then the world from about 93 to 2000, it looked pretty optimistic. We had the .com, the internet was becoming a thing. Everybody was getting rich seemingly overnight from the internet. And then life seemed to be good. life seemed to be on track, and yesterday looked no different than tomorrow. And that was until September 11th, 2001, that Tuesday morning, when, really even the day before, September 10th, that Monday, life seemed like it was just going to go on like it always had. And then that day happened, that morning happened. And I remember being, I had a roommate named Shiloh, and he was a bartender in the town I grew up in. And we had an old apartment. We lived downtown, and it was one of those kind of renovated 2-room studio apartments. And not a studio apartment, but it was kind of a really weird layout. It was on top of a store, a bicycle store. And it was not wired for anything. I mean, you could plug in like stuff in a like a toaster, or TV or something, but there was no cable. There was no anything I could connect into for the television. So the TV we had was just we had one TV, and then we had a VCR, or maybe it was a DVD player by then. One of the two. Anyways, that's all we had. We didn't really have the news. And then you had Nokia phones, which, obviously, you couldn't get any news or anything on that. It wasn't a smartphone. And I just remember him, and this guy never woke up before me. Never. I mean, the guy worked till like 2, 3 in the morning. So he always slept in late. All his classes were in the afternoon. I remember he came in, and I was off that morning. I didn't have class until like later. And he came in and just started shaking me. It was like, "Hey, we're under attack. We're under attack. We got to go somewhere where there's a TV." So we got up, and I got dressed, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was already done with ROTC at this point. All I had to do was graduate. And I had 2 semesters left. So that fall semester, and then I had the spring, and I graduated that May. And so we run over to our friend Jason's house, who had a TV in another apartment across town. And we go over there, and we watch everything unfold, and it was surreal. It really felt surreal. And I just remember thinking, like, this is gonna change everything. This is gonna change the way things were. There's gonna be the way things were the day before, and everything seemed hunky dory. And then there was the way things that became immediately after. And we didn't know how bad it would suck, but we knew that it would, some pain was coming, right? Just in the way we live our lives. And I got to thinking about the airports. I mean, you used to be able to go straight back. You didn't even have to have a ticket or anything. You could just go back there if you wanted to wait for your family that were deplaning from, coming in from wherever. You could just go meet them at the gate. And now it's like you're getting, strip searched and patted down, and you're having to walk through all this radiation and X-ray stuff, and getting scanned inside and out, and everything that you have is put through the conveyor belt and scanned. And I don't know, it just, that's one aspect of it, but certainly the world changed after that. So there are these moments in time where the world was one way before, and then it becomes something different afterwards. The JFK, the day that JFK was assassinated, there was the way it was before, and then there was everything after. Martin Luther King, everything, all of these major pivotal points in human history. So I would say that from the end of World War II, really through 2001, life was the way we lived our lives at the time. We couldn't foresee it being any other way, right? We all got sold on these ideas, right? Like, hey, you need to get in the stock market. You need to get your 401k planned out. You need to get all your retirement stuff planned out. You need to get reverse mortgages. You need to, all this stuff, to thinking about, what you're going to do after you retire, presuming that you're going to live that long to retire. Now, there's nothing wrong with planning, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared. I think that we should all do that. That there's nothing wrong with being prudent, but it was just kind of the mindset, and it wasn't in the individuals necessarily. It was the institutions that fed us this idea that the way the world was right then and there, that day, pick a day, was the way it was always going to be. There might be some minor technological advancements in here, in this place, and that place, but really we just assumed that 1995, 2025 would look different, in the sense that it would be more modernized, flying cars and all that kind of stuff that we saw in the Jetsons. But like, the things, the institutions would remain the same. You know what I mean? Like the IRS, you know, death and taxes kind of thing. The government would always be there. Social Security would always be there. The 401ks would always be there. And so in the 1990s, the subculture that was rising up from grunge music and just that whole genre, things became, it was kind of weird. It was like this paradox. On one hand, you have very nihilistic younger generations. And then on the other side, the 20, 30, 40, you know, and up year olds, you know, they were out making money and they were living the American dream. And 9/11 was that wake up call for a lot of people that, you know, that the United States was not invincible, that we could be touched and made to hurt. And regardless of what you think of 9/11, I have my doubts on certain aspects of it, but regardless, the event happened, right? It's 25 years in the past now, but it happened, and we have the last 25 years to look back on and see how things have changed. And if there's any younger people here that were born after 2001, you've never known a world that was different than this. You know, as crazy and chaotic as this world has become, this is all they've ever known. And for those of us Gen Xers and boomers and others, you know, you grew up in a world where you saw the changes. You saw the way it was before and the way it became after said event. And I think each one of these times, something dies a little bit in the nation, right? If the nation were a living being, these moments in time would be like blows, you know, in a fight, you know, getting your head rocked or getting stabbed or something. It's something that's painful and it's causing your body pain. And one of those instances would be Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. You know, again, JFK, MLK, Robert Kennedy Jr., you know, these pivotal moments in time where something, even for me, like at a personal level, there was when Princess Diana died. And I remember being out that night partying. I think it was 97. If I'm wrong, correct me, but I think it was 1997. And I was at a bar, drinking a beer, and they had a tiny little TV in the corner. And I remember looking up at it, and I just saw that Princess Diana was in a car crash. And I was like, what? You know, because as most young men of that age, were very much attracted to her. It's kind of like our Marilyn Monroe, except she was actual royalty, right? And so I just stood there transfixed. And before I knew it, like everybody in the bar was just stopped drinking and they were just looking at the TV. And we were all kind of numb from the reality that she was. And then, you know, they pronounced her death and everything. And it was like, whoa, you know, it didn't seem real, you know? So anyways, all that to say that there is an idea of America that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you could make something out of your life. You could come to this country with nothing and you could make something of yourself. And that's what drew so many people from around the world. And for the most part, if you followed those rules, for the most part, it worked out for you not to, you know, it worked out most of the time. And now it seems like everything is turned on its head. But we'll get there. So back in 2008 and 9, Zogby did a poll. They were asking Americans, like, did they feel like they could still achieve the American dream? And in here we have 59%, which is a little over half, believe this. They said, you know, believed I'm intelligent and work hard, so I should succeed. A little less of that is 52%. America is a land of opportunity. You know, further down, I'm an optimist, and, you know, on and on. So I was asking, I was looking online tonight and seeing what was the percentage now. So it's dropped down to somewhere between 40% to the low 50s in terms of where they think if they could still achieve the American dream. Now, I think, you know, at the time when this original poll was given back in 2008 and 9, that was in the height of the mortgage crisis, which, you know, was pretty devastating to a lot of people. And Also, Barack Obama, this junior senator from Chicago that nobody knew who he was the rising political force, and he would go on to win the election that year. And, the first black president or half black president. And, things looked on the up and up for a lot of the people that felt like, if you go back to like we go down here to this bottom half here with the people that say that they don't think it exists. It gave a lot of hope. And I would say that this number is probably pretty high, but given the circumstances with Obama just coming into office, and you're black, you're Hispanic, you're Asian, whatever the case is, you're looking at that and you're thinking, wow, things are changing, and I can be president one day. Or some people, I'm sure people had these kinds of thoughts, and kids were taught this in school, that if you worked hard and played by the rules, kept your nose clean, you do well, you succeed in life. You might not be president, but you could. See this guy Barack Obama, he was a nobody 2 years ago, and now look at him. And so they use him as this example of achieving the American dream. And what did Obama do? I mean, right out of the gate, he's like, I'm going to fundamentally transform the America, and he's going to change everything that got him to where he was. And so I would say that as crooked as the Clintons were, and they certainly were very crooked, they still fall second in line to the amount of damage that one individual can do to the United States. Now, so 2008, 2009, a little over half believed that if you worked hard, you could still achieve the American dream. 2026, that number is somewhere between 40 and 50%. And I would even give that amount of, I would give that number as high as it is to the fact that Trump has come back into office a third time, and he is, talking about making America great, and everybody's kind of on board with the MAGA. Not everybody, but a lot of people, half the country, over half, are on board with trying to make America great again. And from a human standpoint, that seems reasonable, and that seems logical, and that seems like something that we should aspire to. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to succeed in life, to want to have a house, have a wife or a husband, kids, decent car, maybe a pool in the back or something, and a job you like going to. There's nothing wrong with those things. I just want to caution people that if you don't, I want to caution people to say that I would not put all my eggs in this basket on earth. Because we can see how fast things have changed over time, and how fast some things can happen that will radically transform the way things are to the way things will be. And a lot of times it's not the utopia that you want, it's the dystopia that you're going to get, right? Okay. And thank you to Smidgen for that super chat. Appreciate that. Now, I want to play a short video for you, and I know I've struggled with this in the past because I wasn't doing it correctly, but if you guys can, I'm going to just go ahead and play it. If you guys can hear it, give me a thumbs up in the chat, because I want to talk about the death of this. And I've played this video before with Britt Gillette a long time ago, but I didn't have the audio, so I'm going to make up for it tonight. So let me add this here.
About how the average American is starting to feel as major corruption is being exposed, especially now with the case in Minnesota and the daycare fraud. This is not just about money being stolen anymore. It's about a growing feeling that being a good citizen, being a hardworking person, paying your taxes may not be worth it. People are starting to feel stupid. They think, well, I'm here, I'm playing by the rules, I am working hard, I'm providing for my family, I'm doing the hard work, and I'm the idiot. You see the memes online and we laugh, like, oh, me on my way to work, thinking that I should have just opened a daycare center in Minnesota and made millions. And again, it is funny, but it's also deeply sad. Because the next thing is, why am I even doing this? And that's the part that no one wants to talk about, because this kind of feeling shapes culture. I come from Brazil, as you know, and in Brazil we have this thing we call the Brazilian way, which is the idea that there's always a shortcut, there's always a loophole, a way to take advantage of a situation. And people think it comes out of nowhere. Oh, it's just the Brazilian way of living. No, this comes from years of Brazilian people being robbed and nothing being done with the thieves. So we now think that survival means cheating the system before it cheats you. Eventually, people stop believing that being honest is rewarded. When a society teaches its citizens that being honest makes you a loser, well, that's really dangerous. You don't just lose money, you lose trust, you lose dignity, you lose the culture that holds it all together. And once that's gone, it's really hard to get back.
Wow. I think the pivotal point she said in there was that when a nation loses the trust of its citizenry, that the institutions that make that nation function and operate, when that trust is gone, it's gone. And trust is so hard to get back once it's lost. And I don't know if, in relationships, if one partner cheats on the other or there's some violation of that trust, it's almost impossible to get back, and it's hard to get back to the way things were. And I feel like on a national level, what has happened over the last 20 years is that we have seen this abuse of our trust so profoundly disturbing that it's hard for people to believe that this country is still worth fighting for, and that this country is still the place to achieve your dreams. And I'm glad that the Trump administration has focused on fraud, waste, and abuse coming back into office here in 2024. The fraud that he has attacked so hard was the foundation and the source of funding for all of the troubles that he went through in his first administration back in 2016. And all of that fraud, all of that corruption had been put in place largely by Barack Obama, who had, and George W. Bush. They were appointing these people to these offices that were like lifetime appointments, apparently. And these guys were just as corrupt as the day is long. And they did not care about your American dream. The only thing they cared about was getting wealthy and making money and staying in power. And that goes for Republicans and Democrats, for that matter, and the establishment types. I mean, what do they say? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you're a politician in the U.S., the most powerful nation, you're pretty powerful individual. And with that, you have the money that comes with it. You've got the donors, you've got the political PACs, you've got all of the different ways that industry comes in and tries to influence politicians to vote this way or to vote that way. I would have been interested to see recently when the House passed this ban on this pesticide law that basically does not shield the companies from being sued when they know that their products contain things that cause cancer. I got to imagine that you had all the big pesticide companies, whoever makes the pesticides, coming in and trying to influence votes to vote against this or have this thing removed from the bill. And that's what the big fight was over. Especially, I think Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna was leading that charge to make sure that if there was a company that was putting some type of chemical in their pesticides that they knew caused cancer, that was, indisputable, that they could be sued. And I think that we've seen a lot of this accountability starting to come back up to the forefront, and we're actually addressing it in ways that matter. And in particular, you've got companies now, I guess the brokers can be sued for the freight movers, the truck drivers, if those truck drivers aren't American citizens, can't read or write English, you know, did not get a test, did not test their way to get their driver's license. Somebody just created a fake license for them and handed it to them, and they can't even speak English, or they don't understand the signs on the road. Those brokers can now be sued. So what do they stop doing? I mean, almost instantaneously, all these illegals that were driving these 18-wheelers and rigs, now nobody wants to hire them because they don't want to get sued. And I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, a lot of the crashes that we're seeing around the US right now are from people that can't even read basic signs. I mean, we got Americans that crash that can read signs, let alone those folks that are driving here in America on the highways and whatnot at 70, 80 miles an hour, and these 18-wheelers that don't even speak the language. They don't know what all the signs mean. Like, that part to me is kind of terrifying. But needless to say, they're going after the money. And that's why Trump targeted USAID, was the first federal organization that he went after. Then all the different departments and agencies, and making sure that they were doing audits on everything they spent money on, where their money is going, you know, what programs are working to advance around the world. Are they trying to create, you know, reserves for transgendered, you know, jungle mice or something? Like, I mean, all the different things that we just throw money at. To me, that a lot of that money is not going to where we, you know, as ridiculous as it sounds, like transgendered studies in like Ecuador, you know, they put like $200 million against that. That's $200 million of your taxes that you worked hard for all year, that's going to some completely bogus whatever. And it may not even be going to that. It may be that's just the name they gave it, and they're actually funding some type of a narco cartel front down there, or, you know, whatever. Or it's going to some black budget projects, UFOs, UAPs, reverse engineering, exotic materials, all that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of Americans have just lost trust in the system, and Trump coming back into office has renewed some of that trust. And that's where I want to talk about, because I know we could talk all night about how messed up things are here in the United States and in the world at large. But I want to talk about the subtle shift that Satan is going to use to hijack this whole movement going forward. And I think a lot of, let me go back here. I think a lot of people think that when we look back at ancient Rome, we always look at the collapse of the Roman Empire as kind of the gauge for where we are on things, right? But before we do, let me go back a little further, because I want to talk about the institution of government and where that comes from. So from the dispensational hermeneutic, God has ordered the ages according to the same simple principle that he does through every age. So God reveals truth and he assigns responsibility. Man is tested under that stewardship. Man fails through either unbelief or some type of rebellion. God responds with the judgment, and then a new order is presented to go forward, because whatever that change is going to be, it changes things so fundamentally that there was the way things were before, and there are the way things that go afterwards. So let's go through this real quick. So in the normal dispensations, or 7 dispensations, we start off here in the dispensation of innocence, where you have Adam and then Eve are created. They're put into this perfect little garden called the Garden of Eden. And God gives Adam a job, says, hey, you're going to tend the garden, and you're going to name the animals. And Adam does that. And Adam's sad because he sees that every animal has its own pair, you know, has its complementary partner there with him, the female version. But he did not have one. So God makes him a helpmate. He makes Eve, takes a rib out of his side, or causes him to sleep, takes a rib out of his side. From that rib, he creates Eve. So now Adam and Eve are together, and their instructions, or the instructions given to Adam, and presumably Adam gave them to Eve, was that we can eat from any tree of the garden, but the one tree in the middle, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we can't eat from that tree, or we'll die. And that was the only rule that they had, right? So, of course, we know the story. They ate from the tree, or rather, Eve ate from the tree she gave to Adam. He ate from the tree, and they immediately recognized that they were naked, right? Now, we know that Eve was deceived by the serpent, who was Satan, possessing this reptile, a reptilian creature, whatever it was, and she was deceived. But Adam did so willfully. He willfully sinned because he didn't want to be separated from his new helpmate. Now, there was the way things were before, right? They lived in perfect harmony. They were walking around naked as jaybirds, didn't care about it, it didn't bother them. Presumably, they had some kind of a Shekinah glory shimmer on them or something. And as soon as they ate from that forbidden fruit, that was gone, and they realized they were naked. So they immediately go to find something to cover themselves up with. And I would have gotten like palm leaves or something, but they got like fig leaves, and fashion that together in some way. And then they heard God coming, and they immediately hid themselves. So then God obviously is like, "Where are you, Adam?" God knows where they are, but he's asking that rhetorically. When you're playing hide and seek with your child and you kind of can see their feet poking out behind the couch, you're like, "Oh, where are they? I can't find them." It's kind of like that, right? So they said, "We hid from you because we were naked." And he said, "Well, who told you you were naked?" And he goes, "Did you eat from the tree?" And of course, he knows all this. He's doing this for our benefit. And so then we go into the cursing stage with Adam is cursed, then Eve is cursed, and then the serpent's cursed. And they are cast out of the garden, right? And then there's a cherubim with a flaming sword that kept them from ever going back that way. And then we know that the Garden of Eden was lost to antiquity, to the flood. We have no idea where it is exactly nowadays. We have some ideas. There's some rivers that are named in Genesis that we think could be the same rivers. They may not even be the same rivers. Needless to say, I don't think we're going to know what that place is exactly until the Lord comes back and sets up his own kingdom. And then he'll show us and take us to that spot and say, "Hey, this is where the Garden of Eden used to be." So it's probably no place we would have thought. But okay, so we have the dispensation of innocence. I think even if you're not a dispensationalist, you've got to recognize that there was the way things were before, and there were the way things happened and have been since ever after, right? Okay, then the next dispensation. So they're out of the garden. Adam and Eve begin having children. The first child they have is Cain. They have another son. His name is Abel. And as they grow up, we're not told about other brothers and sisters, but these are the focus of the story. We know that through the course of time, Cain is a tiller of the ground. He's growing vegetables and crops and things like that, and fruits. And then Abel is the flock herder. He's tending the sheep. So there was some type of a sacrificial system put in place by then, because we know that before God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden, he takes an animal and he kills it because he clothes them with the skins of those animals. So they're clothed with the skin. So somewhere between that moment and where we pick up the story in chapter 4 with Abel and Cain and Abel, there was a system in place that was already being practiced for sacrifice. So God has this altar out there somewhere, and Cain brings his vegetables as his offering, fruits of his labor, as it were, and God does not accept it. But God does accept Abel's sacrifice, where he takes the best of his flock, kills the lamb, and we know that the principle is set in place there that we'll see later on, I think in the book of Numbers, where it says that the remission of sins can only come from the shedding of innocent blood, right? Or something to that effect. I know I'm probably butchering that, but something has to die because life is in the blood. So something precious has to die. Something innocent has to die to atone for those sins. Now, that is setting in place, foreshadowing what Christ would later do on the cross some 4,000 years later. Now, we know that in this story between Cain and Abel, God tells Cain, and in fact, let me read this. I'm going to start in I'll just start in verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Now here's the key point. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. Now we know that Cain kills Abel. Cain is then freaking out because God comes and said, hey, where's your brother? He's like, I don't know. I'm on my brother's keeper. And the rest of the story is that Cain is expulsed from that group. He takes with him a sister, presumably, and they go off and start their own lineage somewhere away from Adam and Eve. And then Adam and Eve have another son. His name is Seth. And we get the rest of the patriarchs through the line of Seth that trace from Seth all the way down to Noah. Now, during this time, it's about 1,650 years between presumably the moment they're kicked out of the garden and the time of the flood of Noah. And in this time period, there was no Bible. There wasn't TV with televangelists telling everybody, what to believe. There wasn't churches or denominations. There wasn't even tribes of like Israel or anything like that. It seems to me that there was the veil between the physical world and the spiritual domain was not there. There was no veil. Angels kind of came and went. God was here talking to Cain, presumably audibly in some way that Cain could just converse with him. We know that God later, would speak to different people, but he walked with Enoch, and later on with Noah, he gave Noah the instructions, hey, I need you to build this ark, and he laid everything out for him. And I don't know if he did that, directly from God, or God spoke to an angel to say, hey, go tell Noah to go do this. But either way, the veil between the physical and the spiritual worlds was non-existent. And this is also during the time the Watchers departed their post, whatever they were doing. These are fallen angels, and they go down, take human women. They begin to conceive with them, and then their offspring are the Nephilim, and we read all about that in Genesis 6. Now, the Watchers had come down during the days of Jared, is what, according to the book of First Enoch, talks about. And in that time period, you still have a very long centuries and centuries and centuries. Now, the theory is that Satan was trying to corrupt humankind, because back in the garden, when God was cursing the serpent, he's cursing Eve and cursing Adam, one of the curses, the curse that he told to the serpent was that out of the seed of woman, women don't have seed, women have egg, but out of the seed of woman was going to come one that was going to, Satan was going to bruise his heel, but this man was going to crush his head, meaning he was going to destroy him. And so if you're Satan and you are trying to win this war against your enemy, who is God, who is all powerful, and out of those people that he just created, those humans, somebody out of that human race is going to come and destroy you. Satan can't see into the future, so he has no idea what all is in store. But if he can corrupt mankind here genetically, right? If he can taint mankind's DNA from the get-go, then it doesn't matter who the Messiah is. He's going to be able to be traced back to Satan. So Satan was trying to corrupt all of mankind genetically in the flesh, so that by the time that this Messiah figure would come, and we don't even call him a Messiah figure, but this one that would crush his head, when that person comes, that he would already be tainted, right? That was the hope of Satan in this time. And that's why they invested all their efforts and energies into corrupting mankind sexually and through birth or birthright, that Satan would have all of the seed of mankind would be related to him in some way, shape, or form. So 1,650 years later, we get the flood. God says, I'm done with the world. You guys are wicked. But Noah and his family found grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So Noah preserves him, his wife, his 3 sons and then their wives. Tells them to build the ark. They build the ark. The animals come on board supernaturally, 2 by 2, and then the clean animals, where I think were 7 pairs, or they're groups of 7. So anyways, they go into the ark, and they're in the ark for a year, roughly, right? And at that point, when the ark finally does come to rest, the world doesn't look anything like it did before. Now there's these big mountains, there wasn't mountains before, not to the extent that we saw. But when the flood is happening, and you've got water covering the face of the earth, and if the land before the waters was relatively flat, it wouldn't take much for the waters to quickly rise over. And I think while the waters were over the earth, and it talks about this in Genesis 7 and in 6 and 7, that the ground broke apart, and the water that was under the surface of the earth came up, as well as the water that was above our atmosphere came down. So you had flooding from the ground, and 40 days of rain quickly flooded the world. Now, I think during this time period, this is where the mountain ranges are starting to come. There's probably all sorts of geological or topological type of dramatic changes to the Earth's surface under here. The places that were low were now brought high, and the places that were high were brought low. So I used to believe in Pangea. I think it's called Pangea, where the continents kind of floated together. I don't believe that anymore, but I do believe that if you look at where the Atlantic is, for example, that before the flood, that was all probably pretty level ground, and the water that was underneath that kept it level with everything else. And when all that water from underneath the surface of the earth came above the earth, then all that land sunk down, right, and just kept sinking down, and to what we have today with the Atlantic Ocean. Same thing with the Pacific, and really all the different oceans that we have and seas, that they used to be either level or even high ground, and then they were brought low, and the water that was underneath them then were transfixed or traded places with them, essentially. We also know right now, geologists have figured out that there's more water under the Earth's surface than there is above the Earth's surface, even right now. So there's a lot of water in the Earth. And so all that to say is that we had the judgment, we had the responsibility for man, the same thing that God told Cain, said, if you do well, things will be okay. But if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and it's ready to sweep over you, take over you. And that was the failure. For the next 1,600 years, God allowed mankind to be ruled by their conscience. Now, they did have the patriarchs to tell them, that eyewitnesses that were there, that Adam lived for 950 years. So he was like, yeah, God created me. I used to walk with him in the garden. He's real. You had the eyewitnesses there of creation, or of the Garden of Eden, at least, all the way through. Then you had, presumably, the gospel and the stars. The zodiac, what we call the zodiac now, or what the world calls the zodiac now, used to be called. I'm blanking on the name of it now. I think it starts with an M. The Mazzaroth. In Hebrew, the Mazzaroth was the constellations of the stars, and they told a story of the coming gospel, and the gospel story in the stars, right? You had angels interacting with humans, and presumably there was good angels still interacting with humans, not just these unholy angels. And so you had this period of time where the supernatural and the natural coexisted very openly. And then, after the flood, that changed. There was the way the world was, and the way the world becomes after the flood, right? And after the flood, there seems to be this barrier that goes up that now starts to limit what the angels can do, the fallen angels rather, and how they can interact with mankind. The original watchers, we know that according to I think it's 2 Peter and Jude, talks about these angels being cast down to the lowest part of hell and in bondage and chains in Tartarus, and they are there until the judgment day, and they're going to be immediately thrown from there into the lake of fire. So, and then there are other angels, other fallen angels that committed other types of sins that were trapped in the abyss, that were basically awaiting judgment. And then there's still, I mean, you got to think there's more angels than there are stars. And if you take a third of those, that's still an innumerable amount. I can't say that word. Innumerable amount of fallen angels that still exist. There's easily, 10,000 fallen angels to every human that's on the earth. I mean, that's not even without a question. But then you also add in the fact that the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, who were neither fully man nor fully angel, these are who I believe to be the demons, and they are always looking for bodies or things to possess or to haunt because they don't have bodies. And for whatever reason, God allowed them to stay after the flood and not immediately go into judgment, but they are here doing the bidding of Satan. Now, the reason I think that they're disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the dead Nephilim, is because fallen angels, like holy angels, presumably can still manifest physically into human form or into a humanoid form, I could put it that way. They don't have to possess things in order to be bodied, where a demon does have to possess something to be bodied. So there's some type of difference between those two. And the fallen angels, along with the demonic hosts that are, everywhere, have been agents of wickedness and agents of evil ever since. Now, after the flood, the ark lands on Mount Ararat. Noah and his family come out. They create an altar. They sacrifice to God and thank God for delivering from this. And then God gives them what we call the Noahic covenant. We see this in Genesis, the end of Genesis 8, the beginning of Genesis 9. And I'll start here in verse 22 in chapter 8. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So God's saying that while the earth remains, that everything in terms of the natural order is going to remain in place until he makes that change down the road. We know that he does during the 70th week of Daniel. But let me start here in 9 again. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." So we know from the Bible and generally from history that they did not do that. They, in fact, stayed together and they planted little civilizations there in the Fertile Crescent, the Shinar, the valley, the Shinar Valley, or whatever it's called there, basically stretching from southern Iraq all the way up through Syria. And it basically was following the land in and around in between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers all the way up. That's called the Fertile Crescent. And that's where they ended up. And because we know that by Genesis 10, we see that Nimrod is beginning to establish kingdoms here, a lot of these little places. But he's got this one place called Babel that is the focal point that everybody seems to be migrating towards to live. So nobody's spreading out throughout the earth. Everybody's kind of concentrated in this one spot. And, again, this is like a couple hundred years after the flood. So, the population has gotten back up to a sizable number. Now, some changes on the earth happen here. The fear and dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, even as the green herbs. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And then the fifth one here, surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man, and as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. Now, we would call this the beginning of human government, because if you start putting this onus on a group of people living together And the rule is that if you take somebody's life, your life is now forfeit. Somebody has to enforce that. Now, obviously, this starts off in villages. It starts off small, and eventually it begins to grow into what we know now as human government. And with this, we know that government is a God-ordained institution that starts here in Genesis chapter 9 and has continued on. Now, we might ask, what's the judgment from that? Well, the judgment from that was the Tower of Babel. And we read in Genesis 11, where God goes down and he says, no, again, God already knows from heaven what's happening, but he goes down there for our benefit and for the sake of this text that we can get the story from his perspective. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there, confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Now, I personally think that God physically moved a lot of people and dropped people in Australia, dropped people in Russia and everywhere else, the Americas. And that is where we start to see a lot of the same cultures arising around the world at the same time. We used to think that, the pyramids were some of the oldest structures, and we found the Göbekli Tepe site there in Turkey, which predates the pyramids. And then we found places in Europe that predate or around the same time as Göbekli Tepe. You got places in the Americas that have these, ancient, before the Incans, before the Aztecs, before all those guys came, there was people there before them. And it wasn't the Lamanites and the Mormonites and the whoever the Mormons think was the pre-civilizations. We don't have any of that here in the Americas, but there was groups that were here presumably before what we would call the Native Americans came, over a land bridge or by boat or however they got here. But I think that there was other civilizations that everybody was scattered throughout the world. The Aborigines down in Australia, I think, were scattered at this point and were put in this continent island, and they can trace their history thousands of years back. So all that to say, I think God physically scattered them, and that was part of the judgment in that. And not only that, but then you have what would become like the wrath of man, right? The wrath of man comes in the form of government. And we've endured that now for nearly 6,000 years. So this is an ongoing judgment. But we also know that God is the one that creates and establishes, and as these people groups form governments and form communities, and those communities form governments, they eventually turn it into kingdoms and then to nation states and then to empires. But all of that goes back here to Acts 17:26. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth and determine their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So human government is an establishment from God. We see this reiterated in the New Testament. Paul writes, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Now, we use this argument a lot for people that have TDS, and they're like, they can't stand Trump and blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not arguing your feelings about him. That's fine. But we got to recognize that God is the one that puts these people in power. And that would go the same for Biden. That would go the same for Obama. King George, Queen Elizabeth, Mahatma Gandhi, all these people that have seemingly come to power. I don't think Gandhi was a government leader necessarily, but he was a political and social cultural leader. But Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, all of these guys were allowed to come into their time and their place by God's sovereignty. And not to say that God is approving of evil or any of that, but all of these men and some women that come to power are there for a particular reason, because they drive the story forward in some way, shape, or form that impacts things down the road. And, you know, if you didn't have Hitler, you wouldn't have had the Holocaust. You probably would not have the nation state of Israel today without that, because when Israel became, or before Israel declared their statehood in May 14th, 1948, back in November 29th, the United Nations passed Resolution 181, which was the partitioning of what was then called Palestine between an Arab state and a Jewish. Now, they had already shrunk that down considerably from what they had originally were going to give them back in the Balfour Declaration, and even up through the San Remo Conference in 1920. They were going to get all of the nation of Israel. But now, between 1920 and 1948, they had carved out they had carved out the heartland of Israel, which is what we call Judea and Samaria, and the world calls the West Bank. They had carved that out and given that to the Arabs, even though they had already partitioned the side for the Arabs in the form of Transjordan. And the Transjordan king, I don't know his name off the top of my head, he was from Saudi Arabia, Hashemite, from the lineage of the Hashemites. And instead of making that an Arab state for all Arabs, he said, nope, this is mine. And he's like, we are our own kingdom. You need to make carve some more land out of Israel and give that to the Arabs. So thus we've been seeing this conflict play out ever since the 1920s between the Jews and the Arabs over Judea and Samaria and who has control. And in 1967, the Jews took control of Judea and Samaria in the Six-Day War. And that lasted up into the 1990s. And they slowly began allowing Arab communities to go back in there. And they gave up Gaza in 2005, on and on. Every time they've given the Arabs land, it's not worked out well for the Jews. These people are radicalized from birth to hate the Jews. And so they grow up and all they want to think about doing is killing Jews. So it's not sustainable what's happening there right now. All that to say is that kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers, all of these people are there because God has allowed them to live in this time and place to achieve whatever end that they are designed or allowed to do in order to further to the prophetic agenda that God has set forth. Now, again, God is not approving of evil or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that because God allows free will, but he already knows how things are going to play out. There's that tension that we see between the Calvinists and the Arminians about God's total sovereignty or man's free will, and they both exist at the same time. In God's sovereignty, he already knows every decision that every person is ever going to make on anything. And if God cares about the sparrow and can count the stars, knows all the stars by name, then he cares about us infinitely more. And he knows what choices, but he can't force that choice on us, because then it's not free will and it's not a real relationship. This is a forced relationship that is only there in place because we've been turned into automatons or some kind of mindless robot, and that's not what God wanted us. He created the most perfect ending for all mankind, that we would live forever with him in glory and bliss, in eternal joy and happiness and peace and love and kindness and light and beauty, and never being bored, never being tired, never being sick, never dying, never getting bald spots, never getting love handles. None of those things will ever exist going forward into eternity future. We will be in these perfect forms forever. And I know right now, if you're senior or you've got some type of physical ailments or whatever, God's going to heal all those things, and you will never have to live with those things for any longer. I think about that guy, and I couldn't even say the guy's name if I could think about it right now. But the Christian speaker that had no arms, no legs. I don't know if somebody in the chat can round up his name. I think he just died recently, but that guy is going to be made whole. He's going to be made fully whole for all eternity in a perfect body, in the perfect version of him. He will exist. And to me, that I've been pretty healthy all my whole life for the most part. we kind of take it for granted, but I can imagine that if Nick something, Nick V, yeah, Vujicic. Oh, okay. I'm glad he's not dead. I had read somewhere that he had died. But well, nevertheless, he's going to have arms and legs in heaven, and he is going to have a perfect body just like the rest of us, and we will all be in our perfect forms forever and ever, and we will never be bored with God. We will never find the end of God after 1 trillion years, and then 1 trillion on top of that, and then another eternity on top of that. We will still not come to the end of God. And that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, because we can't even wrap our minds around 1 trillion, much less, something that stretches on well beyond that forever. So all that to say is that God puts the governments in place, and they're achieving whatever parts of his prophetic story that he's got going forward. They play some type of role in it, even if we don't understand what that role is at the time. So Paul writes, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. So my thing here is that, people will read that, and it gets abused quite a bit, because some of them will use that to say, well, see, you got to follow the mask mandates, or you got to follow the vaccine mandates, or you got to follow whatever, And in our form of government, we're a constitutional republic. When politicians do things that violate the law, and so they are acting now in a state of lawlessness, it is our duty to protest peacefully, to vote these politicians out, to exercise the form of government that we are allowed to do, since we are a constitutional republic. And we've seen this play out here in the last almost, was it 10 years almost, with all of these guys that have, what we would call rhinos, running the rhinos out of the Republican Party, or, the Democrats get caught up in different varying scandals of all sorts, and the Republicans get caught up in scandals too. But for the most part, that God handles these corrupt leaders, and even he does not delight in the death of the wicked. We still should pray for these people. We should pray for Trump. We should pray for Obama. We should pray for Biden. While, he's literally got 2 feet dangling into the grave right now. We need to pray for him, that he has a moment of clarity and gets saved, because we don't want hell. We don't wish hell on anybody, nobody. Like, it is a horrifying place that you will never want to go to. All that to say is that as Christians, we need to pray for our leaders. We need to pray pray for our nation, that God has mercy on us when we don't deserve it. All that to say is that this institution of government exists because God has ordained this to exist. In this story that we're in right now, this is the way things are. So I have a picture of people are like, why has he got this sea monster coming out of the thing? Well, I got this from Thomas Hobbes' book called Leviathan. And in Leviathan, I'll just read my notes here. It's written in 1651, is a foundational text of a political philosophy arguing that civil peace and social unity are best achieved through a social contract. It claims that humans must surrender their unlimited individual freedoms to an all-powerful absolute sovereign, i.e. the Leviathan, in exchange for security, order, and protection from the chaos of natural human conflict. And the book's broken up into 4 parts. You've got of man, talking about human nature, of the commonwealth, which is the social contract, of a Christian commonwealth. And at the time, Thomas Hobbes was advocating that there should be a division between the church, which at the time was the Roman Catholic Church, and these governments, and then of the kingdom of darkness. And this is where he kind of leans heavily into the Catholic Church as being a force of evil. And I don't disagree with him necessarily on that. the Roman Catholic Church during these times were still in the process of doing inquisitions. We know there's about 150 years or so of the Crusades, where tens of really millions of people died in these Crusades. All Arabs, Jews, everybody along the way. I mean, it was not a pleasant time to live down there. And the Roman Catholic Church, was highly corrupted at this point. They were selling indulgences to get your loved ones out of purgatory. They were paying for, I think that's paying for your sins with the indulgences, but you could pay for your loved ones to get out of purgatory, on and on and on. There's a whole lot of corruption, and that prompted the Protestant Reformation, and on and on. All that to say is that he likened human government to the Leviathan, to this monster, right? So we have from chapter 17, this is the generation of that great Leviathan, or rather, to speak more reverently, of that mortal God to which we owe under the immortal God. Excuse me, to speak more reverently of that mortal God to which we owe under the immortal God our peace and defense. For by this authority given him by every particular man in the commonwealth, he hath the use of so much power and strength conferred on him, that by terror thereof he is enabled to form the wills of them all to peace at home and mutual aid against their enemies abroad. And in him consisteth the essence of the commonwealth, which, to define it, is one person whose acts a great multitude by mutual covenants with one another have made themselves every one the author, to the end he may use the strength and the means of them all, as he shall think expedient, for the peace and common defense. For he that carrieth this person is called sovereign, and said to have sovereign power, and everyone else and everyone besides his subject. Man, these guys wrote hardcore back in the day. So he likened this social contract to the Commonwealth, where people come together, willingly trade their individual freedoms for the greater good, so to speak, that they could come together and live in some type of system that protects them from the natural chaotic forces of the world, whether they be barbarians or what have you. These were the groups that refused civilization and refused to live by the norms of the world, or the civilized world rather. And this is what the purpose of government served, was to protect them from that, from the Vikings, from the Goths, from the Visigoths, from all the different raiding parties that would go out that lived in the forest or lived in the wilds. And we see this played out many times in stories and television shows, and it's sort of romanticized nowadays. But back in the day, life was hard, brutal, and short. And I can't remember who said that, but you didn't live very long, right? In the natural world. I think back in the day, back in the, say from the 1600s all the way back through the fall of the Roman Empire, what they call the Dark Ages and the Medieval Ages, lifespan generally is about 50. You live to be about 50 years old. And, certainly people didn't live that long because of all the hardships that they had to endure without any of the benefits of modern medicine. None of that stuff, hygiene, all of that stuff was non-existent. So people did not live very long lives. So you had to make the most of what you could. But in this idea of the Leviathan, obviously it brings to mind the passage in Revelation 13, where we see this beast rising out of the sea. And in Revelation 17, it explains what the sea is. The sea is the peoples, the nations of the world. And there's this one monster that rises up out of the sea of humanity. And it's called, the sea is also identified in the book of Isaiah, talking about the nations representing the sea, the Gentile nations. In Revelation 13, it says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name." Now let me stop here for a second. So it has 7 heads and 10 horns, We know that the beast that Daniel has shown in Daniel 7 is a four beast, and one of the beasts has four heads. So you end up with seven heads there, and you have the beasts that are given to Daniel are as follows. It's the lion with the eagle's wings. You had the bear with the three ribs in his mouth, and he's raised up on one side. Then you have the leopard with the four wings and the four heads. And then you had the terrible beast that had iron teeth and trampled on everything. And in here, it's kind of given in a different order. You have this beast that's rising up out of sea. So that's the last beast. Then you get the leopard. Then you get the bear. And then you get the lion. So Daniel's looking forward in time. John is looking backwards in time, if that makes sense. And so this is how they're presented here. And it's some type of amalgamation of all these different empires that have made this one monstrous system that we call the kingdom of the beast, or the beast kingdom, or the beast system. And the beast is this monstrosity of human government. And out of that monstrosity rises one man who we know as the Antichrist. And he also is called the beast. So you have the personification of the system into this one man, or rather vice versa, that this man is also the personification of the system itself. Much in the same way that Adolf Hitler was representative of the National Socialist of Germany in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. He was the poster boy for the Nazis, right? He was, when you looked at him, you saw the Nazis, right? No matter what he was wearing, you saw the Nazis because of who he is and what he represents. In the same way that this beast system rises up out of the sea and takes over, and it takes over the whole world, the personification of that is this man, this Antichrist, who's called the little horn in Daniel, who rises up, he supplants three other leaders, and he ends up taking over the whole system. So this is, in my opinion, apropos that Thomas Hobbes would write a book in the 1650s calling government Leviathan. And I'm sure he probably was influenced probably by Revelation 13 in some way, shape, or form. But now we see the final manifestation of this beast being very much a Leviathan. It's coming out of the sea. It's this monstrous creature. Now, in this point, this is where I want to talk about the collapse and decline of America, this idea of making America great again. And, you know, we're here at the 250th anniversary here just in a few months of the nation. I want to talk a little bit about Rome and how we are going to be very much like Rome. And you'll get my point here in a second. So we typically, you know, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we typically think when we talk about the collapse of empires, we immediately go back to Rome, the collapse of Rome, because it was pretty, at least Western Rome was very obvious, and it was very, we could see it happening in slow motion. Really from 410 onward, there was these raids by the barbarian, the Germanic hordes that came out that would attack the Romans. And by the time that this started to happen, the Roman Empire was not the same empire it was 200 years earlier under like Marcus Aurelius. They were very much weakened, inflation, overextended, you know, all their offices were corrupt. The people had lost faith in the nation and the system. And thank you, Deborah, appreciate that. And so we typically think of the collapse of Western Europe, or the Roman Empire in Western Europe, similar to the collapsing of the United States. And certainly under the Obama administration, I would even say under the Bush administration, then the Obamas, you had this like, we are a failing nation. It was, people were becoming very nihilistic because of all the corruption that was happening. I mean, if you watched the news during those years, you had Glenn Beck coming on, speaking out against it. You had Rush Limbaugh. You had all these people talking about what was wrong with the nation and how we have to get back to the golden years of America, right? So we typically think about the collapse of Rome with this, but I don't think that's where it happens actually. In February or late January, early February of 44 BC, you had a man named Julius Caesar who was appointed dictator perpetuo or dictator for life in late January, early February, and he was assassinated by March. But he had already been in power for about 5 years. And so the first time that he came to power, he was in charge for like 10 days as dictator. Then he gave it back, and then he was given power again. And so he had ended up coming to power by 49 BC. He'd ruled kind of like an emperor, still working with the Senate, et cetera, and still kind of had some checks and balances with him there. But you had, this is where I think the US, we're at this point now where things are about to shift into this direction rather than the collapsing of Rome in 476. Rome wasn't always an empire. It wasn't always an imperial system ruled by a Caesar. Rome was founded in 753 BC, and from then to 509 BC, they were just ruled by kings. And then from 509 BC to 27 BC, you had the different kinds of governments that came out of this. You had oligarchs, you had republics, you had the Senate, consuls, assemblies, and you see that by 27 BC that a lot of different things had happened, including Julius Caesar, right? After Julius Caesar, there was a bit of a civil war. This is called the Second Triumvirate that came to power afterwards. This is where you had Octavian, Mark Antony, Lepidus, I can't remember, Cleopatra. All this is all during this time right here. But then you get the Roman Empire in its principal form starting in 27 BC. So it was an imperial rule disguised as a restored republic, but the emperors held power with the Senate. And then you had from 284 to 395, this is when the Roman Empire was dominant. And so you had, I think, Diocletian, then you had Constantine. There was another guy in there too that served after Diocletian, but he didn't hold power very long. Constantine, and then the rest of the emperors that basically dominated, and it began to convert the empire into a Christian empire, if you want to call it that. The pagan temples began to close down. They became Christian temples. Pagan priests convert over to Christian priests. And so this is really from the time of Constantine going forward, where there's this kind of a cultural conversion from paganism that, they worshiped the pantheon of gods. They had Zeus and Jupiter and Mars, and on and on and on of all these different gods. And they began to shed those and then basically fall under the tutelage of institutional Christianity or this governmental Christianity, where the head of the state was the same faith as the people below them. And if they weren't, they quickly became alienated to that system. Now, if you go to Matthew 13, you have the 7 kingdom parables there, mystery kingdom parables. And I want to go to the parable of the mustard seed. Let me see if I can find it here. Uh, 13:31. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs. It becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. And so in the context of these parables, the birds are viewed as a negative thing. Excuse me, my nose is itching like crazy. The birds are viewed as a negative thing because in the previous parable of the sower and the seeds, the birds were the ones that came along and ate the seeds. that they never got a chance to take root. So in the context of these parables, the birds are viewed as a negative thing. So instead of the Great Commission, where Jesus tells his disciples to go and share, spread the gospel from Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, to the ends of the world. Instead of the church going out into the world came into the church, right? These birds come and nest in this tree. And these birds, in the context of the parables, are viewed as unclean. And now you've got the unclean things nesting in this tree. And I think this is where the merging of government and the church comes into play under the time of Constantine. And when the Western Empire fell, what remained was really the church. And so the church began to take on the mantle of becoming kingmaker and the ultimate power in Europe for nearly 1,000 years. And this is where the Roman Catholic Church system comes into play. We know that in the the eastern leg of the empire, the eastern side of the empire, the Byzantines went on for another, 1,000 years, and were finally conquered by the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Now, from Suetonius, I think that's how you say his name, he's writing about Julius Caesar, and he writes, "For not only did he accept excessive honors, such as uninterrupted consulship, the dictatorship for life, the censorship of public morals, but he also allowed honors to be bestowed on him which were too great for mortal man. He held his third and fourth consulships in name only, content with the power of dictatorship conferred on him at the same time as the consulships." So this man was one of the first man that had been given this like godlike power in the Roman Empire. Now, Sir John Glubb, who wrote The Fate of Empires, wrote this in I love this quote, and it's paraphrased here, but the people of great nations of the past seem normally to have imagined that their preeminence would last forever, that sentiments like these would be publicly expressed without evoking derisions shows that in all ages, the regular rise and fall of great nations has passed unperceived. The impression that it will always be automatically rich, this is the second quote, the impression that it will always be automatically rich causes the declining empire to spend lavishly on its own benevolence until such time as the economy collapses and the universities are closed and the hospitals fall into ruin. Now, these two quotes talk about, number one, the normalcy bias that exists, that people of the great nations seem to think that their way of life would go on forever. They can't imagine what the world would look like. I mean, if you lived in the 1500s, in Europe or whatever, and you're a businessman and you have a family and you're dealing with the issues of the day, you can't even imagine the world we're in today. That was so far beyond their understanding. And yet look at all that's transpired between then and now. And how much things have changed over this time. And secondly, the point here with the second quote, the impression that it will always be automatically rich causes the declining empire to spend lavishly on its own benevolence. Again, normalcy bias in the sense that they think that the way things are now are the way things will always be. And this is a deception. This is a trap that people get lulled into. And I think that people even today get lulled into this idea, especially when I hear people talking about, well, when I retire, and they're like in their 40s or whatever, when I'm retired, I think I'm going to move to this place or that place. Or they're talking about their 401ks or that their golden parachutes or all this other stuff people go on and on about where they think they're going to be in 10, 20 years. Well, folks, we don't have 10 or 20 years. And that's not because I'm a doom and gloom or anything like that. Even if the Lord's return was not a factor in this, and I'm just using this as a hypothetical, the things that we're doing today with technology can't be undone. And they are so incredibly dangerous. And the dangers even themselves are so unknown that we've given a term to it, especially with artificial intelligence. They call it the event horizon, that moment where singularity happens and these systems seemingly come to life, or sentience of some kind. And, like how Skynet comes to life in the Terminator series. but everything beyond that moment is unknown, even to the men that are and women that are creating these systems, artificial intelligence systems, because they have no idea what it looks like on the other side. They're hoping they're creating a utopia, but given the track record of everything, we're just creating this giant dystopia of human bondage that's going to enslave the world until the final moments when Christ has to return in order to prevent all flesh from dying out. So I think that normalcy bias is incredibly dangerous. I think that the point that with, we are not in the collapse of 476 AD, but rather we are in the collapsing of the republic into some type of a dictatorship. Now, I'm not saying Trump is a dictator. I'm not saying that Marco Rubio or JD Vance or anybody else is going to be dictators. I'm saying the whole world, the whole system is being thrust into this situation where a few people are going to rule. And out of that few people, that oligarchy, one man is going to rise up and he is going to take over everything. And he's going to have the technology to do it. Now, you guys know I've talked about Daniel 7. Well, the animals that were described in Daniel 7 come from the statue here in Daniel chapter 2. This is the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. He had this dream. He was troubled by this dream. He calls in all his wise men, the magi and the wizards and all those kinds of people. And he tells them, I want you to tell me what my dream meant. And they ask him and say, okay, well, tell us what your dream is, and then we'll interpret it for you. And he's like, no, I want you to tell me what I dreamt and then tell me what it meant. And if they couldn't do it, he was not only going to kill them, but he was going to kill their families, and he was going to burn their houses down, and he was going to destroy every possible remembrance of their existence and erase that from the earth. And it wasn't until Daniel, this Jewish slave, Hebrew slave that was captured in 605 BC as a teenager, presumably, and brought into the palace to serve there. It was only until him that he was able to go before God, beseech God to give him the wisdom to interpret this dream, to know it and then interpret it, that he is able to go before Nebuchadnezzar and tell him the dream and then interpret it for him. And we know that he does. And he tells him that you, O King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. After you will come another kingdom inferior to yours, but there will be a silver, the chest and arms of silver. You would have a abdomen, a waist, if you will, of is it brass or bronze? I always get these mixed up. I think it's bronze. I don't know why I'm looking it up. I have it right here. The bronze, waist of bronze, and then the two legs of iron, and then you had the feet of iron mixed with miry clay. Now, in the interpretation of the dream, Daniel tells him that after he explains to them what all of these different types of metal are that make up this statue, he says this, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. And the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Talking about a shot caller, Daniel saying, not only is this dream certain, the interpretation is sure. Like this is exactly what it means. I have no doubt. So I find it funny today that you have a lot of pastors and preachers that try to water this down or make it sound like it's something that it's not. Or even in Daniel 9:27, the 70 weeks, these things that are determined, these 6 things that are determined, they're determined by God to happen. And so many of the church leadership today dismiss it out of hand, like, oh man, that doesn't mean anything. It's, whatever. No, it does. It means everything, because this is foretelling what's going to happen here at the end of the age. And we know, of course, of what's going to happen, and who the stone is cut without human hands. This is Christ. We read in Isaiah 9, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with the judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Now, this is talking about, obviously, the kingdom age, when Christ returns after the second coming and establishes his kingdom on the earth. We see that in Revelation 19 with the second coming, which is not the rapture. The second coming means the second time he steps foot on the earth again. And at the rapture, Jesus does not step foot on the earth. He only descends down to the clouds or to the atmosphere, and we are called up to where he is. So the church is removed from the earth. The judgment commences. He returns, and we return with him at the second coming in the armies that's described there in Revelation 19. And we come back with him. He destroys the forces of evil that are surrounding Israel from Armageddon all the way. There's like a 200-mile track of armies that are surrounding Israel, that God wipes them all. Jesus wipes them all out. I don't know if we do any fighting. I just know that we're there on horses in the sky, watching everything happen, maybe even participating, which would be cool. But regardless, we'll be there. We'll be eyewitnesses to this. We will be physically there watching this happen. So go back when you read Revelation 19, put yourself there. You're in one of the horses in the armies of the Lord, watching him go out and decimate all these forces. Now, the world that the kingdom age then presents is here in Isaiah chapter 2, but also in the later passages of Isaiah 65. We see 66. We see the kingdom age described in other parts of the Bible, and on. So Ezekiel 40 through 48, Zechariah, I think 14, the end of 14. You've got obviously the book of Revelation, from everything from Revelation 19 forward, and in other places as well. But the kingdom age is something that was well known and well understood in the first century. Now, Isaiah here is writing, and he's given by inspiration of the Holy Spirit that he's shown what is going to happen. The word of Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the tops of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between the nations, and rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, that phrase there in verse 4, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, is outside of the United Nations, which is supposed to represent the ultimate government on the planet, since it's a government of all the governments. However, just like its predecessor, the League of Nations, has very little real authority to do anything. And it is only existent primarily because of the United States. And once the United States divorces itself from the United Nations, as I predict it will, the UN will collapse. And it will basically be repackaged, and it will find its final form in the beast system. Whatever that is, we don't know off the top of our head. We just know that we know that the Antichrist comes from out of the old Roman Empire. Now, presumably the 10 kings are kings over the earth at that time, who represent the 10 horns. and they rule over regions, the 7 continents, the 7 heads, and they have 10 crowns. So they have authority as rulers, and they rule with this Antichrist for an hour or a very short period of time, which we know to be a totality of 7 years. And they are of one mind. And God does use them to destroy the whore of Babylon, the mystery religion that rises up in the last days as the world's final religion, or the world's final humanistic religion. And that is also destroyed by the 10 kings. And then God destroys the 10 kings, and the Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown alive into the lake of fire at the end of Revelation 19. But after that, God establishes his kingdom on the earth. He's ruling from the throne of David, which is in Jerusalem, not in heaven. And he rules there for 1,000 years. And we will rule and reign with him in this new world. And not only will it be new in the sense of Satan is bound, the demonic forces are bound. You've got basically the human race is starting over again. But I think the world will also be terraformed back to its Edenic-like state. It will be literally like a paradise on earth. And the places that people can't live in now, like Antarctica or the Sahara Desert or the Gobi Desert and all these different places in the world that it's just too inhabitable. I can't say that word. Inhabitable, that's what it is. That everywhere will be open for farming, for living. So I think that 1,000 years, we're going to see the world's population spike up to like probably 20 billion people, maybe more, simply because you won't die. I think it says in Isaiah 65 that if you die at the age of 100, you will be thought of as like a baby, like a child, that you died. And the only way you die in that sense is if you reject God. You reject the rulership of Christ as king. And another change in this day and age will be faith. Faith will not work the same way in the kingdom age as it does now, because you won't have to have faith in Jesus that you can't see, can't hear, can't touch, in all the normal ways that we communicate with other people, with each other. But Christ will physically be ruling and reigning from Jerusalem. You could go there and see him. I don't have faith that Donald Trump is alive. I know he's alive until I hear otherwise, right? You can go to a rally and go listen to him speak, or you can turn on the TV and see a live presentation there at the White House or the Oval Office, or whatever the case is, wherever he is in the world. He's out and about. I don't have to have faith in him that he's alive. He's alive. He just is. So I think faith will work differently in the kingdom age, simply because what is faith? Let's look up faith. Faith, chapter 11, Hebrews. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which were seen were not made of things which are visible. So faith is something we exercise in the present because we cannot physically see Jesus. We have pictures of Jesus, or we've got artist renditions of Jesus. We have the Shroud of Turin, if you believe that is real, which I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying there's no real way to know what Jesus looks like, because we've never seen him before. We only know him from Scripture. And we can trust the Scripture because of all of the truths that are laid out in every facet that it exists in. So if you want to look up archaeological truths, you go to the Bible. You want to look up historical truths, you can compare the Bible with what we find in history. Same with archaeology, right? Morality, there's no better system than what the Bible lays out for us. In fact, just think about the things that Jesus taught his disciples about, that the world would know them, his disciples, by how they loved each other, with what great love they loved each other. And that was pretty revolutionary at the time, because people weren't really talking about love. They were talking, that was something, you had for, a mother or a father or a child or a spouse or, a dear friend or whatever. But we as believers in Christ will be able to recognize each other by our great love for each other and our great love for mankind, because we recognize we are given a tiny little slice of God in the form of the sealing of the Holy Spirit. And we begin to see things with different eyes. We begin to see things. We look at that person, and I shared this with my friend today, and a story, and I was like, man, I can't believe I walked into that. It's kind of like, I was kind of like really upset about it. But she reminded me that, God, everybody that God brings into your path does so for a reason. And maybe you were meant to go there. Maybe you were meant to share the gospel, or go back there and share the gospel, or go back there and be an influence, right? And so that helps. We get kind of caught up in our human emotions, and we get caught up in our notions of citizenry or nationality or ethnicity or religion or whatever we divide ourselves into in these little groups. And we kind of look through that lens. But when you become a believer and a born again believer, God opens your eyes to the reality that this world is not all there is, that this world is really just a shadow of things to come. And when you look at it through that lens and recognize how short of time we have left here, and how little, how much little opportunity there is to do the works that God has given us to do, it kind of puts things into it helps put things into perspective. And that when we look at everybody that we look at out there, whoever we run into, recognize that they are created in the image of God, and that we need to share the gospel with them. We're not in charge of their salvation. We're not in charge of making sure they get saved. We're only responsible for in the telling or the doing, and not the results. The results is God's territory. And we let him do that, because in reality, that's the only way that really matters, is if that salvation really happened, is because it's a work of God that he does that. We're only responsible in being obedient and doing the telling and doing the doing of whatever it is God put on us at that moment in time. Well, I think that pretty much sums up my thoughts on the government. Now, if I could just summarize everything, I would just say that, let me go back to being big again. What I fear for this nation is not that the nation is going to collapse into some kind of, collapse of the Roman Empire in the 400s, where we just fall apart, disintegrate, and kind of fade into history that way. I think what will take place, and this is a bit of speculation on my part, but if we're as close to the end as we think we are, Satan is not going to have time to recreate some new great empire in just a matter of months or even a year or two between the rapture of the church and the 70th week kicking off. I think what will happen rather is that he is going to corrupt the places that exist now in even the United States. Obviously is ripe for corruption. We see Trump trying to tackle this with mixed results, but it seems like the United States will become something very different after the rapture of the church. When the rapture happens and it removes whatever the number of people percentage that is, I just kind of run with 10% because it's an easy round number to think about. But if you have 340 million Americans and 10% of that is immediately taken out of the mix, that's 34 million Americans that aren't paying taxes, that aren't showing up to jobs, that aren't in the military anymore, they aren't in law enforcement anymore, they aren't doctors, or they aren't nurses, or they aren't cooks or chefs or truck drivers or anything else. I mean, it's a huge change in the way things are. Like instantaneously removing 34 million Americans, just boom, like that, it will collapse the economy. And like I said before many times, the United States doesn't disappear from the map. We're not just gone. But I think what comes back out of this is going to be this new type of government, much akin to the dictatorship that we see with Julius Caesar. And they will rule from a position of martial law because they'll have to. And that martial law will because they'll be undermanned and limited in what they're going to be able to control, going to increasingly rely on artificial intelligence and these systems like Palantir and Starlink and SpaceX and all the different systems that are out there that basically will be used to control the human population going forward. And it will probably be broken up into regional powers first. And out of these regional powers, you'll end up with 10 leaders. And these 10 leaders then will be supplanted by this one guy at some point, at least by the midpoint. And he may be a rising star at the very beginning. And maybe by the midpoint of the first 3.5 years, he is able to secure power over the 10 kings and basically take control of everything. And they will, in effect, become this beast kingdom that will persecute mercilessly anyone that opposes them. And I don't care if you're Hindu or Muslim or Jewish or Christian, or you'll be of the Christian faith in. Anybody that does not take the mark of the beast, which is going to be the ultimate form of loyalty. Back in the Roman times, you had to do a pinch of spices or whatever and throw that into the fire in honor of Caesar. In this case, you'll have to take a mark in your hand or in your forehead. And if you take that mark, you're damned forever. And the reason you're damned forever is because it changes you. It does something to you. Either it controls your mind and you're never able to come to the point of salvation again, or it does something to you genetically and changes you that you're not human anymore. Technically, it does something to your DNA. And so we know that technology exists today. The technology, Revelation is not a book of technology, but it does talk about technological capabilities that we see in Revelation 11 with, for example, the 2 witnesses that are killed and their bodies are left on the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days, and the whole world sees their bodies. That's only possible in our generation because before us, there was no satellite television. There wasn't smart devices. There wasn't internet. There wasn't any way we could see that. You could see film from things that happened around the world, but it was filmed months or years earlier. And you're finally getting to watch it in the US or wherever you are in the world. And at the second of that is the mark of the beast. That technology was impossible. It was impossible in the time of the Caesars. It was impossible in the time of the rise of Islam. It was impossible in the rise of the Khans like Genghis Khan and Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Hitler, and even the United States right now. That technology exists in our generation, but it did not exist prior to even the 1980s. So it was going to be impossible for one person to control all buying and selling. And what are we seeing around the world too? Right now, we're seeing all of the world's fiat currencies are collapsing, or they're so far in debt or so far overextended that the paper currencies are now quickly falling out of fashion. And it's increasingly, you go to places and I have to ask them, hey, do you guys take cash? I'm sure you guys do the same thing because a lot of places don't even take cash anymore. So fiat currencies are definitely going the way of the dodo bird. And what's rising in their place is going to be a digital currency that's programmable. And ultimately that digital currency will be linked to or connected to this device. I don't know what to call the mark. It's some type of a computer chip or quantum dot tattoo or RFID type technology or something to that effect. that will be implanted into the human body. And once you take that, you're damned forever. And so I don't know if anybody will see this after the rapture, but if you do, don't take the mark of the beast. That's the very worst decision you will ever make. It's better to starve or be beheaded or persecuted in the short little bit of time you have on the earth, rather than to face all eternity apart from God, which is going to be in the lake of fire. You don't want to do that. Okay, I have been going on now for nearly 2 hours, so I'll do a short Q&A, and I have not been able to catch up with anybody's conversations on here, so forgive me. I will go collect questions, and if you guys, did you guys collect questions from Facebook as well? Let's see here. All right, this is from MNL, or no, that's tonight, from Tanya. Maybe off topic. I believe that the UFO, UAPs are demons, fallen angels. Do you have any idea how and where their crafts or ships are manufactured? Well, I don't think they're necessarily manufactured on the earth. I think that fallen angels and the demonic, particularly the fallen angels, are capable of constructing craft that can do all sorts of things that we see them doing today. Referring back to First Enoch, we know that in that time, Enoch these fallen angels were introducing new technologies to the peoples of that day. In the days of Noah, they were teaching people how to make to take herbs and various things from nature and make drugs out of them, to get high or to alter their state of mind. We know that they taught men how to make swords and weapons of war. They taught women how to create makeup and to beautify themselves so that they could seduce men. So they were teaching them all sorts of forbidden knowledge that God was not ready for mankind to know. And instead of these things coming about through the natural course of events, we see that the demonic entities and hosts are jumping ahead and introducing, jumpstarting this type of, it's like giving your kids, cigarettes at the age of 5, like, it's just like candy, not that you should do that. I'm just saying that that's kind of the same thing, yeah, they should not have been given that. Anyways, we should not have been given that technology. Now, again, take the book of Enoch with a grain of salt. We just know that it was a common book that was around in the 2nd century, Second Temple era. It was well known by then, and we know that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it was around in the times of Jesus' first ministry on the earth. So all that to say is that they were there at creation, according to Job, and if they saw creation happening, I bet they probably have a very I don't want to say strong, I would say probably superior knowledge of how everything works in the universe down to the quantum level. So for them to construct craft, I don't think is very difficult for them to do that. And there's, the material that we're finding that the few crashed, retrieved spacecraft that we have, they call it exotic material. They're not from Earth, right? The materials are not from Earth. Now, I think they crashed the Roswell thing on purpose, and any other crash that they did, I think it was intentional for the sole purpose of giving us this technology. So again, it would leapfrog us ahead. What might have taken us 50 years to figure out now, was shrunk down to like 10 years. So their intention for leaving these, or the fact that we're finding these spacecraft or whatever, I don't think it was accidental. I don't think they were bad pilots. I don't think they got tired or sleepy or whatever and crashed, or got drunk and crashed their space. I think they were crashed intentionally. If we have any biologics, any non-human biologics, they could be these creatures that they are creating through experimentation. These the gray aliens or whatever, they're kind of like puppets in a way, that these things can be possessed by a demonic host, and they can exist in this form, and they can exist so that we can find it. You know what I mean? Like these bodies, or they show up to people, or, during sleep paralysis, or they show up during abduction events. And this is what people describe them as. They're the same kind of description that Aleister Crowley, when he described that his spirit mentor, I forget the name of him, was speaking to him, he appeared like that. He looked like an alien. So I think that these things the little gray aliens can be manufactured, but they themselves are not like a living soul like we are. They're like kind of like an insect. They create the shell of these things so that we can discover them, because they crashed them intentionally and left some of their bodies behind, the suits behind. And we know that we are not alone, right? And not just the church has already known that for a long time, but the secular world that's coming out of Darwinian evolution, coming out of not nihilism and atheism and humanism and all the things that deny the spiritual realm, are now being shown physical evidence like, hey, we're not alone. So then they come up with all sorts of other theories about ancient aliens, and they start trying to figure out ways, how can they explain this from a human perspective? But I think this is all intentional. It's all part of the deception that's coming with the disclosure, and it's coming with the eventual revealing of whatever these things are. Whatever the most secretive, sensitive videotapes or evidence that we have, all of that stuff I believe will come out before the rapture, and it will come out to perpetuate the deception, perpetuate the lie that when the rapture happens, these things are the cause of the rapture, or they took us off the earth, or they removed the troublemakers from the earth, these born again Christians. So that to me is why we are hearing about them now, and why it's ramped up so much in the last 20, 30 years. And even now, why it's being normalized at the highest levels of government, because they can't hide it anymore. It's too much evidence is out there. Too much of people are seeing it from all over the world. There's no way to hide this any longer. And these things are flying over nuclear sites. They're flying over military installations. They're interacting with our military aircraft. They become a national security threat. So they have to be discussed at this point. Okay, from Gary Turner, question: what if the Lord rained down fire or hailstones on the Pride Land Festival, or maybe even released the two angels? That would be crazy. Yeah, it would be. It would be to see like a fire or a comet or something that just so happens to hit that Pride place during that festival. Not enough to kill everybody, but enough to just scare the what out of everybody, I think would be pretty cool. To let them know that, hey, I see what you're doing, and I'm not happy about this. But we got to also remember that Israel right now is in a state of unbelief. That's exactly how Ezekiel was shown in the Valley of Dry Bones, how they would come back out as a nation. And it would not be until the end of the tribulation that, as a nation, they finally cry out to Jesus to save them. And that's what triggers his return at the second coming. So he said he's not going to return until they acknowledge their offense. And that is I think that's in Hosea 6, 1-3. Let me double check. No, I'm sorry. That's in Hosea 5:15. Hosea 5:15, I will return again to my place till they acknowledge their offense. Then they will seek my face, and in their affliction they will earnestly seek me. So we know that he is currently off planet physically, but we know that relationally that we can know Jesus now. We can come to that point of salvation. And you come to that point of salvation by recognizing that you're a sinner, that you cannot pay for your sins, that the only person on the planet who could ever pay for your sins is Jesus. and he never sinned. And we also know that the Bible says that the wages of sin is death. And since Jesus never sinned, death couldn't hold him because he had no wages to earn because he had never sinned. So he is able to conquer death and hell, death in the grave, or hell in the grave, by rising again, conquering death, and providing a way out for us that are sinners, so that when we place our faith in Jesus Christ's finished work on the cross and his shed blood on the cross, we trade our righteousness for his righteousness, and that makes us worthy to stand before God the Father, because we are not going in our own righteousness. We are going in the righteousness of the Lord who covers us. So that's what makes us acceptable and allows us to live with him in his presence. And if you die without making that decision, you're cut off forever. You don't get a second chance after death. Now, there are a few people that have had like these near-death experiences, and I don't want to get into all these are exceptions to the rule. They are not the norm. The norm is when you die, you're dead, and you don't get a second chance. So all that to say is that, these people out there that are going to this festival, still very secular, very humanistic, homosexual, whatever, we need to pray for them that God opens their eyes, because it would be an act of mercy if a small little comet came through and started raining down some fireballs or whatever, driving everybody out of there. Will that happen? I don't know. I doubt it, but it would be, if it does happen, we would know that this is something that God allowed to happen. There's another thing that I was thinking about. I saw somebody's comment, something about education, but one of the things in the American dream that we always harp on is education, as if education was the answer to all of the problems that mankind faces. Now, certainly having an education helps. I'm not knocking having an education, but education knowledge is not liberation in the sense of the human soul. I think about all these scientists that have died or gone missing. Now, I don't know if it's some of the cases in these deaths that we've seen. I don't know. It's like up to 15 or 16 now. Some of them are said to be, without a doubt, suicide or unaliving yourself. I know that much education, much wisdom, as Solomon would say, brings sorrow. And I think a lot of people that get to these points in their life where they've learned so much, I don't know, it seems like it's almost too much for people to handle and to continue on with it, because the old saying, ignorance is bliss. It's true. People that are ignorant are generally don't care if they're ignorant, and they just kind of live however they want to live. But when you have a lot of education and you're exposed to a lot of the world and a lot of everything, that's like an additional weight that you're taking on yourself, having that knowledge. And that's why being a watchman these days is so burdensome to people, and it's such a heavy burden to carry when you're constantly going through the news of the world and all the horrible things that are happening, and you're trying to wake people up. That's a burden on you. It's heavy. Knowledge has weight. And anybody that thinks otherwise, if think back to when you were a kid and you got in trouble by your mom, and your dad says, or your mom says, wait till your dad gets home. And then you have to wait for your dad to get home. And if your dad was the kind of guy that would beat the tar out of you or whatever, that was a heavy weight to carry with you, that knowledge of his coming. So knowledge has weight, and I think that a lot of people think that education is the answer. They get to that whatever doctorate they've achieved, and they realize they're still miserable, because, and now they're just they're more educated in their misery, So anyways, Bieberine, why are the great tribulation saints seen in heaven before the great tribulation begins on earth? In Revelation, when does the third woe end? So I think, and I'm speculating here because none of us, there's not a person on the planet that knows exactly how this is going to shake out, but we know that judgments are given in chronological order. So there's seal judgments, trumpet judgments, and then the bowl judgments, and possibly the thunder judgments in between the trumpet and the bowl judgments. We don't know if those are judgments. God sealed it up. We just know that there are 7 thunders, whatever those 7 thunders are. So there's anywhere from 21 to 28 divine judgments that are awaiting the world inside the 70th week. And that's not even speaking of the horror that man will do to each other and the demonic host and the, everything else that's going to be going on in the world at that time. So we know in Revelation 13:7 that the Antichrist is given authority to kill these tribulation saints, and he is going to be very successful in doing this, because we know that in Revelation 7, these saints that are also mentioned in Revelation 6, in the 5th seal judgment, they're seen under the altar with the palm branches, that their number can't be counted. So the Antichrist is going to be able to wipe out anybody that opposes him, save for those that are specifically set aside by God to be protected to the end of the tribulation, namely the Jews, the third of the Jews that flee, and to Petra, or wherever they go that God preserves them at. And if there are any Gentile believers that are trapped around the world in various places that become tribulation saints that somehow manage to survive, there's going to be a small number that will enter into the kingdom age, but they are they're killed. They're going to be killed throughout the 70th week. And I think that that's why we see them there. But what I was saying about the judgments and everything, it seems like that once the seal judgments are opened, they stay open. And then you have at the 7th seal, then the trumpet judgments start, and then they run their course. And then you have the bowl judgments, and then they run their course. And it seems like that at least the 4 horsemen are going to continue to ride throughout the entirety of the 70th week, because we know the rider on the white horse does, for sure. The rider on the red horse takes peace from the earth. So we know that during the 70th week, there will be no peace on the earth. And then we know that the rider in the black horse has the pair of scales, and he is representing of pestilence, or not pestilence, of famine and economic corruption. And there's going to be this huge divide between the very wealthy and everybody else, which would be the very poor. And that's what makes this mark so appealing to people, was that they want to get some type of normalcy back in their life, where they can go to the store and buy whatever they want to buy, or they can go get a car or pay for their rent or have a job or whatever it is that they're going to do inside the 70th week. I don't even know that they'll work inside the 70th week. I mean, people will have certain types of professions to keep the world moving, but the large number of population in the world, AI will take over their jobs. Their countries won't exist anymore. They'll be homeless or landless, and they'll be shifting around or being moved into these 15-minute cities, or whatever the case is. They're going to be wholly dependent upon the system, and they'll have to take the mark in order to stay there and not starve to death. So it seems to me that there's going to be tribulation saints killed throughout the 70th week. And we see them there in Revelation 6, and then we also see their numbers there in Revelation 7. And again, heaven exists outside of time and space, so it's not in our same time. So their number is innumerable in terms of how many there are that are killed. There's probably going to be more Christians or more tribulation saint believers in the 70th week than there are Christians in the church age. The last 2,000 years, there seems to be this vast number of people that get saved during the tribulation rather than taking the mark of the beast. And I think in large measure that has to do with our talking about it now and teaching people about it now, and keeping this alive now so that when the time comes, people will remember and say, oh, wait, my friend so-and-so who disappeared, yeah, that guy was always going on about the mark of the beast. And if they're lucky enough to find a Bible or an article or YouTube channel or book or Rapture Kit or whatever it is that they come across, this idea, Satan is not going to be able to sneak the mark of the beast into the world. And when people do take the mark of the beast, it's not going to be accidental. It's going to be a willful decision that they choose to take it. And I think somehow Satan, through the Antichrist and this beast kingdom, is convincing people that they can gain immortality by taking the mark. And we see that, at least by inference, in Revelation 8, where the demonic locusts are let out of the abyss, and they have the power to torment people for 6 months with their stings, and people are going to want to die and they can't. So it seems that the mark does something to people. Maybe it has something to do with their healing abilities, that they're constantly healing. And so even if they try to take their own life, they're going to not die. They'll just heal back up and just be scarred or disfigured or whatever the case is. So it seems like the mark of the beast has something to do with the lie. There is you should be like God. So you'll have this vast knowledge. You will be able to live forever because your body's going to reheal itself all the time. And there's some kind of lie associated with this. And that for a people that have been so starved of the supernatural for so long, that's why Marvel movies have made all the money they made, all the Superman movies, all of the superheroes, and all people crave fantasy. They crave the supernatural powers and all this because it's better than the alternative, right? It's better than coming out of the theater from seeing a good Marvel movie and you walk out and there's your beater of a car and you got a job you hate and you got your life is blah blah blah. What's more appealing, being able to have a superpower or go back to your normal grind? And that's just the nature of how Satan has made this world. It's making people desperate for something better. And that better is going to be packaged in the form of the mark of the beast. And that's what's going to get people to willfully take it. Again, I think that people will be lined up to take the mark of the beast. We see people lining up for the new iPhone or, some new whatever gadget. People got to have it. They want to be the first to have it. So you got people now putting chips and stuff in their hands, and that's just to get in and out of their office doors or, swipe their, hand over a soda machine at work or, it'll increasingly become more and more biometric. The world will increasingly move more and more biometrically to the point where this technology is going to be perfected into the mark. So, and we can see that too right now with the way that we've done with CRISPR and genetic engineering. On that front, we are figuring out how to extend human life. And there's all different kinds of projects out there, like Methuselah Project, and billionaires are pouring crazy money into this anti-aging technology because they want to live forever. They don't want to die. They have billions of dollars. They want to make that last for another 100 years, if they can. So they're going to invest all sorts of money. And it wasn't until we discovered DNA and started messing around with it that we figured, well, can we clone something? Yeah, we cloned a sheep back in the 90s, Dolly. And I'm sure they've cloned all sorts of stuff in the interim since then. And in that discovery of cloning, and we get genetic engineering where now people can, if they have the money, they can pay for designer babies and their babies can look exactly how they want it to look. It's going to grow a certain height. The baby will grow to, you want it to be 6 foot or whatever. That's just a matter of messing around with some DNA strands, or you want your kids to have blue eyes or blonde hair or red hair or whatever the case is. You can design your babies this way. We are at that point now with technology. So not only are we that place with genetics, but we're also moving as quickly with digital currency. And we're also doing it with the Internet of Things. So anything that can be connected to the internet will be connected to the internet. So then all of that, you put it all together and you start to see the picture of what's going to be the shape of the government that comes out of the 70th week that's in our very near horizon. So that is, we don't have to ask about the mark of the beast anymore as if it's, possible. We know it's possible. It's not how, but which one, which technology is going to be the one that becomes the mark? That's the question we have now. There's a lot of different contenders. So, okay, from Anna K. Question: since New Jerusalem is a city, what kind of buildings will it have? Retail offices? Will there be an economy? I think, if I heard Lee Brainerd correctly, I think he believes that there will be technology in the kingdom age. I don't really know if that's applicable to the church necessarily, since we will be in our glorified forms. We won't need it, but there will certainly need to be work that has to be done on the earth, during the kingdom age, because you'll have humans in their mortal bodies, albeit they'll be able to live for centuries, but they'll be in their mortal bodies. They'll need things to do. And, whether it's building constructions because of the population boom that will happen, or it's farming, or it's, agriculture, livestock. It could be a blend of things. It could be a blend of like the Shire and, mixing in some technologies into that type of a world, where I think you can have both. I think you can have some places that are more urban than others, or more city. And certainly there will be people buying and selling things at that time. It may be more barter. I don't know. I don't know what the economy will be at that time, but it will be the perfect system that will exist. I don't think it will necessarily be the system that existed in Jesus' day, because when he was here on the earth, the Romans controlled the world, or the known world. So, everything was render under Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Certainly the people will come and pay tithes to the temple, or they'll pay with crops, or, go back to that. When people come, the nations stream to the house of the Lord that we read there in Isaiah chapter 2. They will bring gifts and offerings and things like that. You have to cultivate and grow those things, and harvest or mine, or whatever the case is, to be able to bring gifts and offerings to the Lord. So I don't know. We also read there in Isaiah chapter 2 that they'll turn their swords into plowshares. So we know that there'll be farming and, pruning hooks. What do you use pruning hooks for? For fishing and for whaling and, whatnot. So I'm assuming that they'll be able to fish out of the waters there. You'll have people that grow livestock that eventually will have to feed people. So you'll have ranchers, and you'll have, I don't know, but I do think it's probably going to be a mix of things. But whatever that system is, you're not going to have like your old Fiat car that runs on petroleum. Whatever the technology will be, it'll be the stuff that we've been striving for so long, 0-point energy type of engines, or anything like that is from the natural world that we can use, that's endless. We know that Nikola Tesla, back in the early 20th century, figured out a way to create like Wi-Fi, and wireless technology. So we know that potential exists, and we haven't even tapped into a lot of that stuff, because a lot of the big companies today have the market on oil, and they have the market on energy. And if there was some type of an engine that could be created that could run on water, or could run on, air, or whatever, those people that create those things tend to have very short lifespans, and their technology goes bye-bye. So they are not going to give up their, multi-billion dollar companies for the sake of clean energy or free energy, when that takes money out of their hands. So anyways, I think whatever the technology will be, it will be clean energy, free energy. It'll be endless energy. It could be magic, too. People could just ride on things that seem to float, or, I don't know. I don't know. It'll be different than what it is today, but I don't think it'll be devoid of all kinds of technology. So I tend to agree with Lee on that. All right. Pete, what is a great deception? The great delusion. I think we know what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteousness, deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. So in the Pharaoh's case, like in the Exodus, we know that Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then God hardened his heart, and then Pharaoh hardened his heart, and God hardened his heart. And there was kind of this back and forth for a while, but I mean, ultimately, Pharaoh hardened his heart against God. And he was convinced that he was right, and he was convinced that he had, that he himself, the Pharaoh, they viewed themselves as gods. Because their magicians could do supernatural powers. And I think that when we talk about all the lying signs and wonders that Satan is going to be able to deceive the world with, I think we are beginning to see it now with all the stuff flying around in the skies, and these orbs that show up, and these strange lights and strange sounds, and all this stuff that's happening in the earth around us. Even like 3-eye atlas, that kind of stuff. And I just heard this the other day. They're still tracking 3-eye atlas going outbound, and it like disappeared off everybody's radar, or however they see cameras, whatever, how they see these comments and how they track them. It disappeared, and it appeared like 200 million miles further than it had been. Like it teleported or something. It was super weird. Anyways, I think that all of this is building up to the great deception, and I do believe that culminates in some type of a revelation of these beings, or this these guys reveal themselves or something, and it's going to be, I think, right after the rapture, that they are here to help us, and they're here to make mankind better, or whatever the case is, and people are going to believe them. And so we're starting to see that stuff now. And it's interesting that Paul writes the way he writes it. He says, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan. So the coming means he is in the process of coming. And I think that we're seeing that this side of the rapture, with all the stuff going on in skies and things, strange things happening. So I think that is going to be the great deception that answers all those questions that people are going to have immediately after the rapture. The people that aren't exposed to the rapture, don't know about it, or never heard of it before, or whatever, these things start showing up. And people's kids are gone. Like, I think all the kids will be taken off the planet. If kids are under a particular age where they won't even reach adulthood inside the 70th week, I think they will be removed from the earth. And so that obviously would impact every nation on the planet, and it would impact every culture on the planet. So people are going to be desperate and wanting answers for what happened. And then all of a sudden, the skies just fill up with these things, and they might even land in places and introduce themselves or whatever. And so then it's going to be like, they're going to be the reason why all these people disappeared, or their children disappeared, or whatever the case is. And so I think that, to me, it makes the most logical sense of what the deception is going to be. We already have false religions on the planet. We have cults. We have churches dedicated to UFOs right now, that Jesus was an alien. We have churches that are Jedi churches that worship the Jedi Knights or whatever, as if that were a real thing. We have cults of every kind of flavor in the world, in every country, in every part of the world. There's different. So I don't think it's necessarily a religious system that is the great deception, or even the apostasy. And the reason I think it's both, like when you go back to the beginning of 2 Thessalonians 2, where Paul uses that word, the falling away, we know as apostasia, And we see instances in the book of Acts where it's used as a physical departure. We also see it used in terms of a religious or spiritual departure. I think it's both. And I think that's why the Holy Spirit had Paul use that word, because at the moment of the rapture, what's going to be left is the apostate churches and the apostate world system. So whatever's left behind is going to be, there'll be a moment in time where there is no Christians on the earth, none, no redeemed on the earth. They'll all be removed from the earth. And because that happens, when it happens, I believe the people that witness it happening will be the eyewitnesses that say that wasn't aliens, that was the rapture. And it could be that at the moment, the twinkling of an eye, we are changed in a moment, but we ascend slowly or we ascend visibly. So the changing might happen instantaneously from mortal to immortal, corruptible to incorruptible. But it could be that we go up slowly, just like the two witnesses in Revelation go up slowly, and everybody sees them. And Jesus ascended slowly, so everybody saw him ascend. It could be that sense that we are, and that's what helps the eyewitnesses to our translation become the first believers of the tribulation saints. And nobody's going to be able to convince them otherwise that what they saw is what they saw, so they saw us being raptured up, and it's not aliens. So there's going to be a lot of people around the world that see the rapture happening, and they'll be the first wave of believers that come out of, or that start out in the tribulation in the 70th week. So to me, that makes the most sense, that the deception comes from space, aliens, whatever, because it's already been happening. Satan has been seeding this ground now for the last 70 something years, since Roswell, and through science fiction, through movies, books, everything. It just seems like he's invested an awful lot of time and energy into this one particular lie that is going to have to bear fruit someday. And I think I can't think of what else it could be, other than we know that the image of the beast seems to be AI, or it's an AI that's possessed by some demonic entities, and it'll seemingly come into life, but that's at the midpoint. So I think the actual deception starts off from space. What is a good resource to learn about dispensationalism? Man, now there's different kinds of dispensationalism. You have classic dispensationalism. You have I guess normal dispensationalism, Ryrie, those guys. And then you have progressive dispensationalism. And then you have something that I heard the other day that I didn't even know existed, was Reformed dispensationalism. So it's kind of a blending of Reformed theology and dispensationalism, which, when we look at when a dispensationalist looks at his arch nemesis in a way, it's kind of always like the Reformed side of the house, because they tend to be covenantal theology believers, which is, basically there's a covenant of works, which happened with Adam in the Garden of Eden. And then the covenant of grace is everything that follows. That's it. That's the only divisions they put in the Bible. And we know in the Bible that there is major changes in the way the world exists before Adam and Eve sinned and fell, and after they sinned and fell, or fell and sinned. There's a way the world was before the flood, and there's a way the world was after the flood. People lived for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before the flood, and that was normal. And they interacted with the internet or supernatural beings, and that was normal. And then after the flood, there's a big change, right? There's the way the world was before Abraham was called forth, because now, instead of it just being mankind kind of writ large, now there's a Hebrew, and there's the Jews and the Israelites, and then there's Gentiles. So now the world is divided into two, between Jews and Gentiles. There's the way the world was before the law was given, and the way the world was after the law was given. The law had to be given because Christ came to fulfill the law, and he fulfilled it perfectly. And then you have the way the world was before Christ died, and the way the world is after he's death, burial, and resurrection. So all that to say is that it's to me, it's oversimplifying the Bible by simply saying it's just a covenant of works and covenant by grace, because then you just sweep a lot of stuff under the rug and a lot of stuff gets lost. But I have this book here, Clarence Larkin, the greatest book on dispensationalism, probably one of the first books I read. And to be honest, classical dispensationalism has some issues it's got to work through. It's not the perfect form, but I think in terms of hermeneutics, dispensationalism is the best system that we have. It's simply taking the word of God in the grammatical, historical, and literal fashion, and you take it literally, unless taking it literally makes it nonsensical. So I use this example all the time. Jesus says, I am the door. I don't think Jesus is literally a door with a knob and hinges and made out of wood. I think I understand the context of what he's saying is that through him is the only way to salvation. So that's what a door does. A door allows you to go through something. So all that to say is that you take everything literally and in context, and you take it literally, unless taking it literal makes it, the whole passage or the whole sentiment there, nonsensical. I'm trying to think of, there's I think it's Isaiah 55, if I'm not mistaken. "55:12. For you shall go out with joy and be led out with peace, and the mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you. And all the trees of the field shall clap their hands." So we know, if I take that literally, then that's nonsensical, because trees don't have hands, and hills and mountains don't have vocal cords. But if you take it in the context of what it represents, that creation itself is going to burst forth into worship of the Creator, then I can say, okay, well, I'm not taking this passage literally, because if I did that, it would be nonsensical. But I can understand within the context of that passage that creation itself is going to rejoice at the return of its Creator. Now, that's an example from Isaiah. If I go to Revelation 20, which, for whatever reason, this chapter is such a divisive chapter with so many different eschatologies. But verse 2, he laid a hold of the dragon and that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. Can I take that literally? Sure. Somebody will say, well, how can Satan be bound for 1,000 years? He's a spirit. Well, I mean, the angels are also spirits, and they're going to bind him with something that can bind an angel, because they have that capability to do that. Can God create? God spoke the universe into existence. I'm assuming he can speak a chain into existence that can wrap up Satan and keep him bound for 1,000 years. I don't think that's too hard. And he's cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. The second time we come across 1,000 years. Can I take that literally? Sure. There's nothing in that would make it nonsensical, because we know 1,000 years is a reasonable number. We know that from the 10th century to the 20th century, that was 1,000 years. We've gone through this many times in human history, so we obviously know that that's not, it doesn't say that he bound him for a innumerable amount of years or 1 trillion years or whatever. I mean, that would have made no sense to anybody prior to the 20th century, or whenever it is that we came up with the number trillion. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Speaking of the church and the tribulation saints. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for their word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and not received his mark on their foreheads or on his hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So really, throughout Revelation 20, you get 1,000 years mentioned 6 times. And if you listen to those nitwits like Hank Hanegraaff and people like him that say, "Whoa, well, God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills. Does that mean that God only owns a cattle on 1,000 hills? No, but that's not the same context as this. He was saying that in the sense that, and perhaps at that time, 1,000 was like the largest number, the denomination of numbers that they could think of. And we would be relevant throughout every generation. Obviously, God owns every hill. I don't know how many hills are on the planet, but God owns every single one of them. He owns every planet in the universe, every star in the universe, every speck of black dark matter in the universe. He everything is his. So in that context, I think it's in Psalm where he says 1,000 cattle on 1,000 hills. Taken into context, the surrounding passages and everything like that, you would say, okay, well, that's a hyperbolic, or maybe not hyperbolic, but it's like under representing the total number of hills that God owns. But here, when you have the same number mentioned 6 times in the same context of being a period of time where these particular things happen, why can't I take that literally? That does not make it nonsensical at all by any stretch of the imagination. So I think we take it literally, unless taking it literally makes it nonsensical. When I get to Revelation 13 and you got a beast that comes out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns on the horns, and it's got the bear-like qualities, leopard-like qualities, lion-like qualities, and it's a ferocious beast. That imagery there is not something I can just apply any definition to as if it were arbitrary symbols that nobody knows. Those symbols are unpacked for us in Daniel chapter 7. And in fact, the meaning behind those symbols are unpacked in Daniel chapter 2. So we know exactly where to go get those symbols and what they mean, the definitions for those symbols. So again, you can take Revelation pretty much literally. There's some parts in there where you wouldn't take it literal, but you could say, given the surrounding context of the passage, okay, I can see what this type of language is presenting to me. It's a metaphor. When John sees these demonic locusts, he says they have hair like a woman. Really, anytime he says it's like this, I think that's a simile. When he says something is like this, he's not saying that's the exact thing that it is. He's saying it's like it. He's giving us an example to reference, for a frame of reference to understand what he's seeing. So we have similes, we have metaphors, we have other types of languages that we see, or modes of language rather. But in Revelation 20, it is just cut and dry, 1,000 years, 6 times. And yet we have major denominations now basing their whole eschatological position off of a lie, because they refuse to accept that as 1,000 years. They just say, no, that doesn't mean what it says. So then they become judge and jury over that particular translation. They embrace a false eschatology. This false eschatology, for example, like amillennialism, then which denies the millennial kingdom coming on the earth. Then they say, well, if Christ is not returning, then we need to have somebody ruling on the earth for Christ in his stead. So then in the Roman case of the Roman Catholic Church, you get the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, the vicar. He's called the Vicar of Christ. And what does vicar mean? It means vicarious. He is ruling vicariously for Christ on the earth, since Christ is ruling in heaven. And neither shall the two ever come back together again. So to me, that is a heresy, and it's obviously blatantly false. It's built off of a lie, because Augustine translated Revelation 20 to be allegorical, not real. And Augustine, came out of North Africa. Augustine of Hippo. He was greatly influenced by Greek Gnosticism, and in the Gnostic worldview, the flesh is bad and the spirit is good. So he kind of, with that mindset, he says, well, how can Christ return to this wicked world? This world's too wicked for him. He's too holy, too perfect. He is holy and perfect, yet he says he's coming back to return on the earth. But Augustine's like, that can't happen. So he takes Revelation 20, he says, no, that's all allegorical. It just means a long period of time. The Catholic Church goes on and further kind of builds off of this false foundation. It says, well, if Christ is ruling in heaven, we will be his representatives on the earth. We need to conquer the world for Christ. And then he can return at some point, if he ever chooses to return. And then even that language is very ambiguous, because 1,000 years in their mind can mean 1,000,000 years or 10 million years. It's just some nonsensical number. So then if you apply that to chapter 20, then you can apply that to the other chapters that are even more symbolic, or have more similes, or have more this, that, the other. There's more wiggle room for them to reinterpret Revelation to say whatever they want it to say. But notice, so John does use the word like a lot, or as, like or as, or similes. But notice that he does not use that in Revelation 20 at all. He doesn't say, for example, in verse, this is the end of verse 4, and they lived and reigned with Christ for like 1,000 years. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that in verse 3 that Satan should know that he should deceive the nations no more till like the 1,000 years were finished, or as 1,000 years, or something not saying that it is 1,000 years, something like 1,000 years. No, he doesn't use the word like at all, or the Greek equivalent of that in the language. So we were meant to take that literally. Yet we have three major eschatological positions that have branched off this one chapter. You have premillennialism that says Christ returns before the 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. Amillennialism, which denies Christ ever comes back to rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years. And then you have postmillennialism that says that the 1,000 years the church has to dominate the planet for 1,000 years, or we basically subdue the whole world for Christ, and then he returns. So three major eschatological positions within Christendom. Two of them are false. One is correct, and it's simply because we take it for what it says. We don't try to redefine what 1,000 years is, or diminish it or dismiss it. We simply take it for what it says, and that's how we know we're correct. And this whole lie about we're already in Satan's little season right now. One, Satan has never been bound and cast in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. He's been free to roam. Peter says he goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Paul says that he's the prince of the power of the air. John says he's the god of this age, or I think Paul writes that he's the god of this age. John writes in 1 John 5:18 or 19 that Satan, the whole world, is under the sway right now of Satan. So Satan is not bound right now. He is free, free as a bird, running around doing whatever kind of damage he can do. We know that he goes back and forth to the throne room to accuse us day and night before God. He is the great accuser of the brethren. So he is not bound. But all that to say, you can simply go to Chuck Missler teaches on dispensationalism, Charles Ryrie, obviously Clarence Larkin, Schofield, Woolvard, Jack Hibbs, dispensationalist. Anyways, I can do a presentation just on dispensationalism, but there's many resources out there. I would be cautious with progressive dispensationalism because it starts to blur the lines a little bit with church and Israel. I'm still learning about Reformed dispensationalism because I think from my understanding of it is that they hold to like the TULIP, that acronym that comes out of Calvinism, total depravity, unmerited grace, limited atonement. I can't remember what the IP is. Anyways, the way that the Calvinists mean it, I don't believe is accurate. And so if you have Calvinism over here and Arminianism over here, I think in their extremities, I think they're both incorrect. I think that we're in the middle, that there is both God's sovereign will and there's mankind's free will. God obviously gave Adam and Eve a choice in the garden. He said, hey, don't do this, yet they did it anyways. They made a choice, right? When Jesus says that, whosoever will come, whosoever means whoever decides to come, right? That they make that decision. And, God wants us to make this decision on our own. He doesn't want it forced on us. And it never works if it's forced anyways. How many people do you know in your own lives that are atheist, or they, just hate God, or they're run away into cults or whatever, because they grew up in a very super religious household, and they just rebel against it. So religion in and of itself is not the great savior of mankind. It's simply a way that man tries to orchestrate our worship of God, or any God, because religion is not simply limited to Christianity. It's the cults are religions, paganism is religions, even atheism, is a belief system that denies a deity, but then prompts or puts man in the place of God. Gotquestions.org is also dispensational, so you can check them out as well. Or from Mary Kay, I thought Satan knew the scriptures, so wouldn't he know the future that way? Well, Satan knew the scriptures after they were written, but he didn't know them before they were written. If you're referring back to Genesis 3:15, I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mary, but he didn't know that in Genesis 3:15, and he's very much actively trying to avoid going to the lake of fire. So he's going to do whatever he can. He doesn't care about throwing us to the lake of fire. He doesn't want to go. But I like this quote this passage from Paul, 1 Corinthians 2:7. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Had Satan known what God's plan was all along, that Jesus came to die, he would have never he would have never influenced mankind to crucify Jesus if he'd have known that. But so he doesn't know, he's not omniscient. He doesn't know the future. He only knows what the Bible says about the future. To the dude, do you think that all the new tech and prosperity beginning in the late 19th century has damaged the church? I grew up in the 50s and it was good. I think it has. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely created way more distractions these days than I think they're saying now that the average attention span for most people is like 8 seconds. Certainly with the new generations, it's considerably shorter. Hence why this, I can make some TikTok reels or something out of this, and young people to scroll through it, but people's attention span is not what it used to be. You think back to a movie, right? Like a good movie that you is good, but that it's also kind of slow starting out, and it's got to build up to the kind of crescendo of the whatever the thing is going to be about that movie's about. And young people today don't have the patience to sit there and watch a movie and get through the slow part of it that's doing the storytelling to actually get to the point, where the action is. So at least my kids are like that. They don't have the patience to sit there, and I'm like, well, trust me, it gets good. And they're like, oh, this is boring. I don't want to do this. Anyways. Believing in Jesus, would Adam and Eve be in hell because Jesus was born unto the earth way later? Well, we know that before, so hell was, or Sheol, the underworld, Hades in the Greek, was, I don't know if it's physically underground, it's down, but it's also in a spiritual dimension. And I know that, like in string theory, they believe that there's 10 dimensions. If you listen to the folks at CERN that seemingly have monkeyed with some of this stuff, they seem to think there's 17 different dimensions. Chuck Missler believed that there was 10. Maimonides, I think his name is, a 13th century rabbi, I think spoke about 10 or multiple layers to the reality. But in hell, in Sheol, Hades, was the underworld where everybody before the cross went to, and it was divided into two components. On one side, you had torments, which is exactly what it sounds like. It was a tormented existence down there, and fire and flame and no water and perpetual thirst and hunger and everything else. And the other side was paradise. And so paradise was also called Abraham's bosom. And between the two, there was a gulf that nobody could cross. And so when Jesus is relaying the story of the rich man and Lazarus, he does not tell it like he would tell a parable. In the parables, he never used proper names. He just said a rich man or a great leader or a king or this man, a businessman. He just kind of kept it generic. But when it came to Lazarus and the rich man, which I think the rich man's name, through Jewish tradition, his name was it's kind of a weird name. But it's like a common word, but it's not a common word we would think of as a name. He described the rich man go into hell in torments, and immediately he lifted up his eyes and was in torments, right? And he's thirsty. He just begged Abraham for just to dip his finger in water and put it on his tongue. And then he asked Abraham if he could go warn his brothers not to come. So he was aware of everything still going on above. And, he was conscious. He was in pain. But on the other side, Lazarus immediately goes to paradise, and he's in comfort. And where on the earth he was starving and he had sores all over his body and he was just being licked by the dogs. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. But there he was immediately in comfort and peace. And so when Jesus died on the cross, he descends down into hell or Sheol, the underworld, Hades, whatever you want to call it. And he says, I am the one you guys have all been waiting for. And so they looked forward to a redeemer to come save them. They didn't know his name was Jesus or what he looked like. But we know that even Job, the book of Job, I think, obviously, I don't know who wrote the book of Job, whether it was told by Job himself or somebody with Job, or even later by Moses, through the Holy Spirit writing that book. But Job, if it's written by somebody other than Moses, was the first book of the Bible written chronologically. And even he then, Genesis or Job, I think it's in 19 or Job 26, says, I know my Redeemer lives and I will see him with my own eyes. So even he knew, and he wasn't even a Jew. He was living over there in the land of Uz. I think it was Uz, somewhere near where Abraham came out of, like Iraq, modern day Iraq, somewhere in that area. And is it Ur of the Chaldees? Anyways, he wasn't Jewish, but he believed in a Redeemer, that the Redeemer would come. And I think he predates Abraham for the simple fact that, you remember I talked about that Abraham was the first guy that God, he's the first person in the Bible that's identified as a Hebrew. And that word Hebrew means one that crosses over the river. So this speaks about when Abram left Ur of the Chaldees and goes over to where God shows him to the promised land. He crosses over the great river, and he's then identified as a Hebrew. And from him, we have, Isaac, and then Jacob, and then the 12 tribes. And then that's where the whole lineage of the Jewish people come from. So I don't know where I was going with that. Sometimes I get lost in my own thinking, but Job predated Abraham. Job lived for like 300 something years. So he he said, and he believed that his Redeemer would come. So those were the people that were waiting for God to send somebody to save them. They had faith in something they couldn't see, someone they couldn't see, and the evidence of not seen, going back to Hebrews 11. And so they are in paradise awaiting him. Even Lot, like when you read the story of Lot, like when you read Genesis, well, really any of the chapters that are dealing with Lot, but particularly in Genesis 19, you don't walk away from that story thinking, man, this guy's a righteous man. He's a godly man. But Peter called him righteous Lot, whose soul was vexed, living in those wicked cities. So he was viewed as righteous in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, you see warts and all. But in the New Testament, they're viewed as righteous. But these were the Old Testament saints that were waiting down there for Jesus to show up. And when he finally does, he takes captivity to captive, and he takes them back with him, and they ascend into heaven. And then what's left in hell is the torments, and that expands, right? That gets bigger, and it starts to grow, because hell doesn't ever get satisfied, right? The grave never gets satisfied. But if you remember back to when Jesus was on the cross, and the two criminals were to the left and right of him, and one begins to mock him and saying, hey, if you're really the Messiah, save yourself, save us too while you're at it. And then the other criminal was like, hey, this guy didn't do anything wrong. He's innocent. We're the wicked ones. We deserve to be here. He does not deserve to be here. And he looked at Jesus and he said, Master, will you remember me when you enter into your kingdom? And Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. So that paradise is where he was talking about going, was down there in the underworld to liberate all of the Old Testament saints, to take them back up into heaven. And I presume that he also preached to those on the torment side, saying, I am the one, basically validating everything that they'd ever known and rejected, saying, I'm the one that you guys should have been waiting for. And so he takes captivity captive. He takes all the Old Testament saints back to heaven. And I think that they're still in their spiritual bodies, but they will get their physical bodies before the kingdom age at the end, where they are given, because they're going to be able to inherit the kingdom that they had for all throughout the Old Testament been told about and been waiting for. Even in Acts chapter 1, the disciples, after the death, burial, and resurrection, Jesus was there with them for 40 days afterwards. And as he's getting ready to ascend, they asked him the question, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Meaning, can you make the world like Isaiah chapter 2, where Israel's the head of all nations and all the nations flow into Israel? And, we are number one kind of thing. We run the whole world. And he's like, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons, but the Lord has said, Father said, but basically you need to go out and start spreading the gospel. He didn't say, don't study prophecy. He didn't say, don't ever talk about the last days or watch for his return. They were specifically asking for the kingdom. And the kingdom was that Old Testament concept of heaven on earth with their Messiah ruling and reigning out of Jerusalem. Thank you, T-Bone, and Watching for Jesus. Appreciate you guys. All right. It is 11:11. Question from James Wells. Wouldn't that mean that there are trillions of angels because there are trillions of stars, or is that just a comparison that they are innumerable, like cannot be numbered by humans? I think it's because they're innumerable. I don't think we have a number for all the stars. There's more stars than a trillion or trillions. I don't think that if you look at a picture of the galaxies, we can't even count all the galaxies. There's I think there's trillions of galaxies, and in each galaxy there's trillions of stars. And it's just like the number escapes us. It's such a vast number. So if there are more angels than there are stars, and a third of those angels fell, that's still trillions of times more than there are humans. We are vastly outnumbered by the angelic host. And honestly, I think that, this is an opinion, but I think that there are way more kinds of angels than we are even told about. In fact, we're only given 3 angels' names in the Bible: Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer, who we know as Satan. Well, I guess you could count Abaddon or Apollyon if they were fallen angels. But we're told about cherubim, seraphim. There's the archangel Michael. But there could be trillions of different kinds of angels. We just don't know that. We don't know. And God is like, I'm not going to lay that on them, because we would get so sidetracked with that. I mean, it would just create a whole 20 different other religions, because of these, because God knows how we are. So he limits what he tells us in the same way that he had, and I can't remember who it was. They took away the pole that Moses fashioned, the pole with the serpent on it. They had to get rid of it because people began to worship that thing. So I think that's probably why we haven't found the Ark of the Covenant, and why we probably won't find the Ark, Noah's Ark, in any real way, because people will tend to worship and deify things as holy relics. We already do this. I mean, Putin is carrying around a painting from like the 9th century, as if it's some kind of a holy relic with superpowers or something, So humans we will worship it, basically anything. We're designed to worship. Humans are designed to worship. And if you're not worship the one true God, there's a bajillion, and I don't know what number that is, a bajillion different kinds of things that people will chase after and worship. So I think we're pretty limited on what God tells us for our own sake and our own sanity. I think we'll be very surprised when we get to heaven and there's like, man, there's gonna be all kinds of things we just like, what? You're welcome, James. Okay, that was it. No questions on Facebook. Awesome. I'm at 3. Oh my gosh, 3 hours. Well, guys, thank you for hanging out tonight. If you made it all the way through, my programs tend to be a little long-winded, but I am still surprised that at conferences I'm able to get it all into like an hour, because I just talk fast and I try and stick to some kind of a schedule. Thank you to the dude. And for everybody that's given super chats, thank you guys. Appreciate it very much. PayPal still open, Venmo. I got rid of my P.O. box, so I don't have a new P.O. box just yet. I'll have to go set one up here. If anybody wants to support the ministry, make sure you like the video, share it with your friends if they're into this sort of thing. I'm not like one of those guys that's very good at self-promoting, but if you want to support, more than welcome to. I definitely appreciate it. So thank you guys for that. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your prayers. Pray for each other. Pray for the ministry. There's a lot of people out today that are hurting physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially, medically, relationally. The church right now, especially us, as Lauren from Certainty for Uncertain Times would call us, the 6%ers. There's not a lot of us left. There's not a lot of people that take the Bible seriously, take Bible prophecy seriously. So I pray that each of you tonight would, before you go to bed, pray for us as a body of believers, that we would continue to carry the torch, continue to warn the world about what's coming. I think this happens to be the most pressing subject of any that we could really be talking about. And I think back to like Noah's day. I mean, when Noah was building the ark and he knew the flood was coming, he wasn't talking about he wasn't preaching. We know he's a preacher of righteousness, but he wasn't like, preaching, live your best life now. If you sow this seed, you'll get 10 seeds in return. He knew what was coming, the complete destruction of the world. And he was trying to warn people about what was coming. I feel like we're much closer to what's coming for us than what was even in his day, in all the years that it took him to build the ark. This world is going to be thrust into darkness at the moment of the rapture. And what's coming after that is going to be it's going to be hell on earth. And, right now, I think people are so dismissive of death. They're dismissive of what comes after death. There's just kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like this, and I don't know if it's because we're so desensitized to death, but like, watching a movie and an action movie and like 20 gunmen get killed by the superhero or the good guy. And I always think about, like, I know it's a movie and I know it's not real, but like, we are so desensitized to people killing people that the horror of it is that the moment that somebody takes their last breath on this planet, they're going to wake up in their eternal destiny forever. And they're going to be trapped there forever. Especially if it's hell. If you're in heaven, you're like, thank goodness. Like, I'm so glad. But, we are so dismissive of the world has become so hardened, like the Pharaoh hardened our hearts so many times as a world against what's coming, that I don't think anybody's really prepared for what's happening, what's going to happen. We think that America's going to be great again, or we think that the world's going to go on like it has for the last 50 years or 75 years, not realizing that we're literally, even setting aside the rapture. I mean, you've got guys like Elon Musk saying that 2027 is going to be like the year that everything changes, and not in a good way. In his mind, there's still that possibility that things can still swing to the good side, but we know in history and reality, things are not going to work out the way we intended them to work out. And such is the nation that we're in now. Life is not going to continue on. Life is not, there's no guarantee that tomorrow is going to be the same as today. Something can happen tomorrow that completely changes the way we live tomorrow, or from tomorrow onward. Some new disease could come out. Some geopolitical event could happen. Something breaks out in the world, some type of a warfare, that, nuclear war, whatever. I mean, who knows what could happen, but the world is definitely gearing up for what's about to happen. And I don't mean the world as in the governments. I mean the natural world, the cosmos. Nature knows what's coming, and that's why we're feeling all of the wild swings and everything, and the earthquakes and the famines and the floods and the tornadoes and the extreme weather events and the extreme astronomical events. All of this stuff is shaking and rattling the planet and trying to wake people up, because I think God is allowing that to happen to wake people up. A lot of people woke up during 2020, during COVID. A lot of people woke up spiritually in events like 9/11. And, for other people, it was, not as extreme, but there was moments in each of our lives where something happens and it changes our trajectory. I think we need to be sensitive to that. And as believers and as watchmen, we not only go out and tell people that, hey, you need Jesus. He's the only way to salvation. Oh, by the way, he's about to come back really soon. I think when you add that on to the rest of that message, it becomes much more exciting. So, well, all right, guys, thank you for hanging out tonight. I should be on Thursday with Dr. Brad Reeves. So I'm going to try and do the Thursday Substack Live with Dr. Reeves discussion. I don't know exactly what we're talking about just yet, but we were going to do it a week before and I couldn't do it. So we pushed it off, I think, until this week. So Thursday Substack, I'll be on with those guys. So God bless you guys. See you Thursday, and keep looking up. Stand firm. Stand in the faith, my friends. Keep running for that crown. So God bless you guys. Take care, and Maranatha.